Section 1. The Grand Lie of Vault-Tec. There's something deeply soothing about underground spaces. The way the air sits still. The way sound gets swallowed up by thick concrete walls. The way the world above, with all of its chaos and noise and uncertainty, simply stops existing for a while. That's the idea Vault-Tec sold to millions of Americans in the decades before the bombs fell. Safety. Permanence. A home beneath the earth where nothing could touch you. And honestly, if you close your eyes right now, you can almost picture it. The soft hum of the ventilation system, pushing recycled air through spotless corridors. The gentle glow of fluorescent lighting running along low ceilings. Families moving into their numbered rooms, setting out their personal belongings on government-issued shelves, trusting completely that they had made the right choice. That this was the smart move. That the world upstairs might burn, but down here, everything was going to be fine. Vault-Tec made sure you felt that way. They ran marketing campaigns that were masterclasses in calming reassurance. The Vault Boy, that cheerful, chubby-thumbed mascot in the blue and yellow jumpsuit, beaming from every advertisement, every lunchbox, every poster on the wall. He gave a thumbs up. He always gave a thumbs up. And that image alone communicated something that no amount of brochure copy ever could. Everything is under control. We have thought of everything. You are safe here. The vaults were presented as the pinnacle of human ingenuity in the face of existential threat. A technological marvel. A shelter for the best of what humanity had to offer. And in the lead-up to the Great War of 2077, when the skies over the United States and China had grown thick with the weight of mutual annihilation, people lined up. They paid for spots. They wore their Vault-Tec jumpsuits like badges of honor. They told their neighbors, their coworkers, their extended family members who hadn't managed to secure a spot that they would be okay. The truth, the real, deeply buried, extraordinarily dark truth, was something else entirely. Vault-Tec built 122 vaults across the continental United States. That is a staggering number when you stop and think about it. 122 underground cities, each one capable of housing hundreds or sometimes thousands of people, each one sealed behind a massive, reinforced door that could withstand nuclear blast pressure, each one theoretically self-sufficient for decades. The scale of the construction effort alone was almost incomprehensible. Billions upon billions of pre-war dollars. Years of labor, engineering challenges that pushed the limits of what the mid-21st century was capable of. And of those 122 vaults, only 17 were ever built to actually work as advertised. 17 out of 122. That means roughly 87% of the vaults that were sold to the American public as sanctuaries were actually something else. They were laboratories. They were petri dishes. They were controlled environments designed to extract data from the people living inside them without those people ever knowing they were subjects in an experiment. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a gradual drift from good intentions into something murkier. The experiments were planned from the very beginning, embedded into the design specifications of each vault before a single piece of steel had been sunk into the ground. Vault-Tec executives knew. The scientists who designed the systems knew. The government knew. Because the vaults were funded largely through government contracts, and the Enclave, the deep state shadow of the pre-war United States government, had a very specific interest in the data that would eventually come out of them. The official justification, at least internally, was that humanity needed to understand how people would behave under extreme conditions if it was going to have any hope of rebuilding after nuclear war. How do social structures form under stress? How does leadership emerge in isolated populations? What happens to human psychology when normal life is stripped away and replaced with something artificial? These were supposedly the grand scientific questions driving the program. But the reality of what went on inside those vaults tells a different story. A story about power, about curiosity, about the particular brand of cruelty that hides behind clipboards and scientific language. A story where the people locked underground weren't partners in humanity's survival. They were the raw material. And here is the thing that makes this universe so endlessly fascinating to sink into, so perfect for a long, quiet evening with the lights dimmed. The vaults are not just horror stories, they are mysteries. Each one is a locked room with a body inside, and the detective work of piecing together what happened, from holotapes left in the dust, from skeletal remains slumped over terminals, from the final, desperate entries in an overseer's journal, is one of the most atmospheric and genuinely affecting kinds of exploration in all of gaming. Wandering through a derelict vault, with the ambient hum of failing systems and the distant creak of pressure-stressed metal, feels like reading a ghost story from the inside. This is the world we are stepping into tonight. 200 secrets pulled from the underground, lore that spans decades of Fallout storytelling, from the very first game in 1997 all the way through to the Amazon Prime Video television adaptation. Details that are easy to miss, threads that connect vaults to each other in ways the games never spell out directly, hidden facts buried in loading screens, terminal entries, holotapes, and developer interviews. Get comfortable. The door is sealed. The bombs have already fallen somewhere far above us. Let's go underground. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, drop a comment below and tell me your location and the time. I always love knowing who's settling in for these. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It genuinely helps more than you might think, and there's a lot more of this kind of content coming. Section 2. Where it all began. The original vaults of Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. The very first vault players ever encountered was Vault 13, and the way it was introduced in the original Fallout in 1997 established a template that the entire series has been following ever since. You don't see Vault 13 as a ruin, you live in it. It is your home. You know the overseer, you know your neighbors, you know the particular smell of recycled air and cheap synthetic food. And then the water purification chip starts failing, and the overseer sends you out into a wasteland you've never seen, and everything you thought you understood about your life begins to dissolve. Secret number 1. Vault 13 was designated as a control vault, meaning it was one of the minority of facilities that wasn't supposed to be running any deliberate experiment on its inhabitants. But that description is a little misleading. The vault's actual hidden directive, according to internal Vault-Tec documents and later confirmed through Enclave communications in Fallout 2, was to keep its population sealed underground and isolated for as long as possible. Not 10 years like most vaults were supposed to last, not 20 years, indefinitely. The Overseer was instructed to prevent the dwellers from leaving under any circumstances because the Enclave intended to use Vault 13's population later, a population that had been kept completely free of radiation and genetic mutation for generations, as clean baseline subjects for their own experiments. The vault was a human preserve more than it was a shelter. Secret number 2. The original budget for Vault 13's construction was set at $400 billion pre-war dollars. By the time it was completed in March of 2069, the actual cost had ballooned to $645 billion. The vault was supposed to operate for 10 years. Instead, it was sealed for over 80 years before the events of the first game even begin. Construction started back in August 2063, making it one of the later completed vaults in the network, plagued by what the Fallout Bible describes as a development cycle that seemed cursed from the start. Secret number 3. Vault 13 was also given an extra Garden of Eden creation kit, commonly called a GECK, instead of the extra water chips that were delivered to Vault 8. This was almost certainly not an accident. The Enclave would have had strong reasons to ensure that the people they planned to use as research subjects were also equipped with the tools needed to terraform a new living environment once they were extracted. The GECK sitting unused in Vault 13's stores for decades is one of the most quietly poignant details in the original game, a gift for a future that never arrived as planned. Secret number 4. When the Vault Dweller finally returns victorious after destroying the Master and dismantling the super mutant threat, the Overseer does something that seems almost incomprehensibly cruel. He banishes the Vault Dweller from Vault 13 forever. The official reason given is that the Dweller has become too changed by the wasteland, too dangerous, too different, and that their presence would inspire others to want to leave. But the real logic, which the game allows you to piece together slowly, is that the overseer is acting on the original Enclave directive. Keep the population inside. Keep them pure. Keep them available. Even the hero who saved everyone has to go, because the experiment hasn't been officially ended. Secret number 5. The water chip that drives the entire plot of the first Fallout game, the thing you're sent out to find before Vault-13's water supply fails completely, was supposed to have been delivered as a backup from Vault-8. The supply chain that was meant to support the Vault network broke down almost immediately after the bombs fell in October of 2077, and nobody ever sent the replacement. The whole catastrophe that sets the first game in motion is a consequence of a bureaucratic failure so mundane, it almost feels darkly funny. Now let's move underground to Vault 12, because this is where things get immediately much darker. Secret number 6. Vault 12 was built beneath the city of Bakersfield, California. It was marketed as being constructed with every amenity in mind, fitted with a water purification system capable of delivering over 15,000 gallons of clean water daily, pulling even from the city's own sewer infrastructure. People in Bakersfield believed they had secured the safest possible future for their families. They wore their preparation as a point of pride. The Vault-Tec promotional materials for Vault 12 apparently gave out something called the Pressed Vault Suit Award to particularly enthusiastic enrolled residents. Secret number 7. The true purpose of Vault 12 was to study the effects of radiation on a sealed human population. And the method Vault-Tec used to achieve this was breathtakingly simple and breathtakingly awful in equal measure. They designed the vault door not to close properly. On October 23, 2077, when the bombs began to fall and the sky turned white, the people of Bakersfield rushed underground, and the door that was supposed to seal behind them and protect them from everything, the door they had paid for, the door they had trusted, just didn't close. It couldn't. It wasn't built to. The radiation poured in, and the people of Bakersfield became something else. Over the years, they mutated into ghouls, and they built a city in the ruin they had inherited. They called it Necropolis, the city of the dead. Secret number 8. The ghouls of Necropolis had a complicated relationship with their identity by the time the first game's events take place in 2161. Their leader, a ghoul named Set, maintained a kind of bitter authority over the ruins, running a system of power that rested on the fact that he controlled the remaining water supply. What the game doesn't tell you immediately is that Set also maintained certain records from before the transformation, fragments of Vault 12's original documentation that connected the current residents to the humans they had once been. The Necropolis ghoul community carried the memory of what Vault-Tec had done to them. Set himself was described as fully aware that the vault door's failure had been deliberate. He simply had no one to hold accountable anymore. Secret number 9. When the Master's army arrived at Necropolis, the super mutants initially attacked the ghouls on sight, believing them to be obstacles rather than the Vault Dweller population they were searching for. Set managed to negotiate a ceasefire by explaining the truth. These were the Vault Dwellers, or what remained of them. The Master's interest in the location collapsed when he understood that radiation exposure had already rendered the population unsuitable for his purposes. He left behind a garrison to monitor the water supply. Later, his army returned and wiped out most of the remaining ghoul population. The descendants of Vault 12's original residents, people who had paid for safety and received radiation poisoning instead, were annihilated a second time, this time by the very super mutant threat that the original Vault experiments had helped create. Secret number 10. Vault 15 sits geographically close to Vault 13 and was a very different kind of place. Where Vault 13 was a controlled isolation experiment, Vault 15 was deliberately designed to house an enormously diverse cross-section of American society. Different races, different religions, different political backgrounds, different economic classes. The experiment was to see what would emerge from that mixing of backgrounds once the vault finally opened. And what emerged from Vault 15 was genuinely remarkable in its scope. 4 distinct factions formed from Vault 15's population and eventually made their way out into the wasteland. One of them became the Khans, raiders who terrorized the wasteland in multiple games. One of them became the Vipers, one became the Jackals, and the 4th faction from Vault 15 became the founding population of the New California Republic, the largest and most organized attempt at democratic government in the post-war West. The entire political landscape of the Western wasteland traces back to a single, overcrowded underground shelter. Secret number 11. Vault 8 is the vault that actually worked, more or less as intended. Its residents were given a functioning GEC and were encouraged to emerge and begin rebuilding after a decade underground. What grew from Vault 8 is Vault City, a technologically advanced, medically sophisticated, highly organized community that exists in Fallout 2. Vault City is also intensely isolationist, deeply suspicious of outsiders, and maintains a citizenship system that effectively divides people into residents and non-citizen laborers with very different rights. The experiment worked, in a sense. A stable, technologically capable community did form, but the social dynamics that developed inside the vault, the hierarchy, the distrust of those outside the controlled environment, shaped Vault City into something that prioritized its own survival over any broader sense of human solidarity. The experiment produced civilization, just not a very kind one. Secret number 12. The Fallout Bible, a collection of lore documents written by designer Chris Avallone and released in the early 2000s, contains a remarkable piece of background detail about the overall vault system. It specifies that the vaults were never realistically intended to house enough people to repopulate the country after nuclear war. The total number of vault spaces available across all 122 facilities could accommodate somewhere between 400,000 and 800,000 people, a fraction of the pre-war United States population of over 400 million. The public presentation of the vaults as a national survival program was essentially fiction. They were always research installations. The people inside them were always the subjects, not the beneficiaries. Secret number 13. Vault City's medical technology, which by 2024 is genuinely the most advanced in the known wasteland, traces directly back to the research programs established within Vault 8. The residents who emerged from that vault brought with them Vault-Tec's entire database of medical knowledge, combined with years of practical experimentation conducted during their time underground. The irony is that this medical expertise, which could theoretically save countless lives across the wasteland, is almost entirely inaccessible to non-citizens of Vault City. Vault 8 produced one of the most functional outcomes in the entire experiment network, and that outcome chose to hoard its benefits. Secret number 14. There's a detail in the first game that players often don't register as significant. The Vault Dweller who you control throughout Fallout 1 is never given a name in the game itself. The manual accompanying the original release refers to the character as Albert, but that name never appears in-game. The Vault Dweller is a blank slate, an everyman. But by Fallout 2, when you play as the Vault Dweller's grandchild, the Chosen One, you learn that your grandmother spent years writing down her experiences in what became known as the Vault Dweller's memoirs. The person who emerged from Vault 13 into the wasteland and changed everything had been keeping a journal. The whole history of the first game exists as text, as written memory, as something that could be passed down. Even the most significant figure in the series' Western canon is ultimately defined by what they chose to record. Secret number 15. The last known location of the Vault Dweller, after being exiled from Vault 13, after everything, is a place called Arroyo in the northern wilderness. The Vault Dweller essentially walked into the wilderness, found a community of tribal people, and became their respected elder. The village of Arroyo is where Fallout 2 begins. Your character in that game is descended from someone who should have stayed underground, but was thrown out into a world they subsequently made better. That is the quietly extraordinary arc at the heart of the series' beginning. The experiment failed at its core purpose, but accidentally created something that couldn't have existed any other way. Section 3. The Capital Wasteland's Underground Horrors. Fallout 3. Bethesda's 2008 reboot of the franchise brought the Fallout world to a new generation of players, and introduced a set of vaults that pushed the experimental darkness of the series into genuinely unsettling territory. The Capital Wasteland, built on the ruins of Washington, D.C. and its surrounding regions, contains 6 vaults, and almost every single one of them is a masterclass in institutional horror. These are spaces where the architecture itself feels wrong, where the cheerful blue and yellow color scheme has gone gray with age and something worse, where the silence between footsteps seems to carry weight. Secret number 16. Vault 101 is the vault where you were born, where the entire opening sequence of Fallout 3 takes place, and on the surface, it seems almost benevolent compared to what you'll find elsewhere in the capital wasteland. But its experiment was its own kind of cruelty. Vault 101's directive was simply that the vault would never open. Not after 10 years, not after 50, not after 200. The residents of Vault 101 were to remain underground indefinitely, completely isolated from the outside world, with no knowledge of what the surface looked like, or whether there was even anyone left alive out there. The Overseer and his inner circle received periodic transmissions from other sources. They knew the world had survived in some form, but they kept that information from the general population and maintained the fiction that leaving was suicide. Secret number 17. By the time of Fallout 3's events in 2277, several generations of Vault 101 residents had grown up and died without ever setting foot outside. Their entire understanding of geography, politics, weather, and social interaction was defined by the walls of the vault. Children born in Vault 101 learned history from the vault's own curated library, which, as you might expect, was carefully edited to reinforce the idea that the outside world remained uninhabitable. The generational scale of this deception, not just lying to one group of people, but engineering an entire culture around a false premise across multiple lifetimes, is one of the more quietly devastating concepts in the series. Secret number 18. There's a terminal in Vault 101 that belongs to the Overseer and contains years of private logs. Reading through them tells a story that the game never announces out loud. The Overseer was aware that his directives required him to deceive people he had known his entire life, including his own family. The logs cycle through phases of justification, of doubt, of something that reads very close to guilt, and finally, of a kind of cold resolution. He had convinced himself that keeping the vault closed was the only way to protect his community from a world that wasn't ready for them. He wasn't a monster in his own mind. He was doing what he believed he had to do. That's what makes Vault 101 feel genuinely unnerving rather than just dark. The Overseer isn't wrong that the wasteland is dangerous. He's wrong about everything else. Secret number 19. Vault 87 sits northeast of Vault 101 and is reachable in Fallout 3 only by cutting through the extremely hostile tunnels of Little Lamplight and Murder Pass, a route that involves navigating through a community of children who have been surviving in a cave system without adults for what appears to be multiple generations. The path to Vault 87 is itself a story about what Vault-Tec's experiments have left behind. The children of Little Lamplight are there at all in part because they have nowhere else to go. Secret number 20. The experiment running inside Vault 87 was the testing of a biological agent called the Forced Evolutionary Virus, commonly abbreviated FEV. This virus had been developed by the pre-war military as part of a super soldier program, and Vault 87 was designated as the facility where it would be tested on live human subjects. The residents were exposed to FEV without warning or consent, immediately upon being sealed inside the vault. Within roughly 2 weeks of exposure, many of them were dead. The ones who survived the initial exposure began to transform. They became the first generation of super mutants produced in the capital wasteland. They were also rendered sterile. Secret number 21. The super mutants created by Vault 87's FEV program are different from the super mutants found on the West Coast in a significant way. Western super mutants, the ones created by the Mariposa military base FEV experiments that appear in Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas, are capable of varying degrees of intelligence. Some, like Marcus in Fallout 2, retain enough cognitive function to run a town and engage in complex conversation. The Vault 87 FEV strain produced something cruder, more uniformly aggressive, and more intellectually diminished. The scientists who ran the experiment at Vault 87 had a different formulation of the virus, and the results reflect that difference. What came out of that vault was something that the original Vault-Tec researchers may not have predicted. Secret number 22. By the time Vault 87's events are reconstructed from the terminals and holotapes scattered throughout the facility, it becomes clear that the transformation process was not immediate. For several weeks, there was a period where the infected residents were changing but still recognizable as human, still able to communicate, to feel, to understand what was happening to them. The records from this period are among the most disturbing pieces of text in the entire game. Scientists documented the changes with clinical detachment, while the subjects themselves documented their deterioration in increasingly fragmented personal logs. One researcher's note mentions that a subject asked, through a filter mask, whether the process was going to hurt. Secret number 23. After breaking out of their confinement, the super mutants of Vault-87 established the behavior pattern that defines them throughout Fallout 3, kidnapping humans from the wasteland and bringing them back to the vault to be forcibly immersed in a vat of FEV. Because the transformation process renders them sterile, the only way they can sustain and grow their population is by converting more humans. Vault-87, in this sense, continues to function as a conversion facility long after any human Vault-Tec presence has ended. The experiment keeps running. It just runs without any of its original administrators. Secret number 24. There is a character in Vault-87 named Fox, who is extraordinary in the context of everything else you find there. Fox is a super mutant who has retained a level of intelligence, emotional depth, and moral reasoning that puts most of the human characters in the game to shame. He has been locked in an isolation chamber, apparently by other super mutants who found his cognitive retention disturbing, and has spent his years of imprisonment reading. He became educated in the way that isolated people sometimes do, driven by curiosity and the time to pursue it. When you free him, he becomes one of the most compelling companions in the series. The irony of Fox is specific and pointed. The most intellectually developed being you encounter in Vault-87 is someone that the facility's other residents tried to eliminate precisely because he was too developed. Secret number 25. Vault-106 is one of the shorter chapters in Fallout 3's Vault exploration, but its premise is among the most immediately visceral. 10 days after the vault door was sealed, psychoactive drugs were released into the air filtration system. The entire population began experiencing altered states within hours of each other. The overseer's logs for those first 10 days don't make for comfortable reading. The entries shift from normal administrative notes to something increasingly paranoid, fragmented, and strange. And the crucial detail is that the ventilation system pumping those drugs never stopped. By the time you explore Vault-106 in the game, 2 centuries have passed and the drugs are still circulating. Walking through the facility triggers hallucination-like effects on your player character. The Vault is still running its experiment. It just ran out of original subjects a long time ago. Secret number 26. The surviving inhabitants of Vault-106, the ones who didn't kill each other in the initial drug-induced chaos, are a faction called the Crazies. They're still down there, still breathing the same chemically altered air, still navigating a reality that has been fundamentally warped by 200 years of continuous psychoactive exposure. There is something genuinely tragic about them when you think past their hostility. They were people once, or the descendants of people, who got locked in a room and had something done to their air without their knowledge or consent. Everything that came after that is Vault-Tec's authorship. Secret number 27. Vault-108 is the vault that gave the gaming world Gary. This needs some context to fully appreciate, because Gary is one of those pieces of Fallout lore that sounds almost darkly comedic when described out loud, and then slowly reveals itself to be something more genuinely unsettling. Vault-108 was designed around 2 simultaneous experiments. The first involved selecting an overseer who was terminally ill, a man named Brody Jones, estimated by Vault-Tec scientists to have roughly 40 months to live after sealing, and giving him the authority to fill all other leadership positions from scratch. The idea was to observe how leadership structures form without the usual institutional support. The second experiment involved a cloning laboratory, built ostensibly for reproductive and medical research. Secret number 28. The cloning experiment in Vault-108 focused on a single resident named Gary. The original Gary was cloned repeatedly, with each successive clone exhibiting stronger violent tendencies than the one before. The scientific staff attempted to control this by destroying clone subjects when they became too dangerous, but they were not fast enough. The clones escaped. They identified non-Gary individuals as threats and proceeded to eliminate them systematically. By the time you enter Vault-108 in 2027, there are 54 Gary clones throughout the facility, and every one of them attacks on sight. Every one of them says only one word: Gary. Sometimes in anger, sometimes in what sounds disturbingly like recognition, sometimes with an inflection that resembles greeting. The vault is full of identical faces, all saying the same name, all trying to kill you. Secret number 29. There is a minor hidden detail in Vault 108 that the game never calls attention to. The original Gary, Gary 1, has slightly different dialogue flags than the other clones if you use certain console commands or look at the game data. The original was the template for everything that followed, and whatever Gary was as a person before the cloning process began has been completely buried under what came after. You don't get to meet the human being who started all of this, you only meet what was made from him. Secret number 30. Vault 108's food and power supplies were deliberately engineered by Vault-Tec to run out approximately 20 years after sealing, despite the official documentation claiming they were equipped for 38 years. The early failure of critical systems, combined with the oversupply of weaponry and the complete absence of entertainment facilities, was baked into the design. Vault-Tec wanted to see how a population would respond when things began breaking down and there was no institutional infrastructure left to maintain order. The answer, in the case of Vault 108, was that they responded with exactly as much chaos as you would expect. Long before the Gary clones arrived, the original residents were already not doing well. Secret number 31. Vault 92 was advertised as a refuge for the finest musicians in the country. The cover story was that Vault-Tec wanted to preserve musical talent and artistic culture in the aftermath of nuclear war, a noble-sounding goal that would appeal to a specific and somewhat self-selecting demographic. Renowned musicians and composers were specifically recruited for spots in the vault. They were given quality instruments, recording equipment, and performance space. For a while, Vault 92 probably was a genuinely creative and productive place. Secret number 32. The actual experiment in Vault 92 was called the White Noise Mind Suggestion Combat Experimentation Project. At intervals determined by the overseer and the Vault-Tec scientists observing remotely, white noise was broadcast through the Vault speaker system. The noise itself wasn't just meaningless static. It was engineered to carry subliminal content, specifically designed to lower inhibitions toward violence and amplify aggression responses. The goal was to see if Vault dwellers could be conditioned through subliminal audio manipulation into becoming more combat effective. The longer-term vision, presumably, involved creating soldiers who could be activated through audio cues. Secret number 33. The first resident to visibly crack under the white noise program attacked and killed 3 other Vault dwellers in what the terminal entries describe as an apparently unprovoked assault. It took 23 gunshots to subdue the attacker. The overseer's logs from this period show someone making the calculation that the data being gathered was too valuable to stop the experiment. By the time other residents began exhibiting similar responses, the vault had crossed a threshold from which there was no coming back. The violence escalated, compounded by unrelated water damage that was compromising the physical structure of the facility. Vault 92 collapsed under the combined weight of engineering failure and deliberately induced madness. The rare violin you can find in return for a reward in Fallout 3 came from this place. Secret number 34. Vault 112 is hidden beneath a derelict car garage called Smith Casey's. The vault's entrance is cleverly disguised, and the facility itself is almost entirely intact when you arrive. No radiation, no hostile mutants, no structural damage. A robo-brain greets you pleasantly at the entrance and informs you that your arrival is 202.3 years behind schedule. The vault is maintained by caretaker robots and appears, on its surface, to be functioning perfectly. This is because it is. Vault 112's experiment has been running continuously since the vault was sealed, and it's still running when you arrive. That experiment is Tranquility Lane. Secret number 35. Dr. Stanislaus Braun was one of the most senior figures in Vault-Tec's hierarchy. He was the director of the Societal Preservation Program, the umbrella program overseeing all Vault experiments, and also the inventor of the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, the terraforming device that several vaults were equipped with to facilitate post-war rebuilding. He was, by any measure, one of the most consequential scientists of the pre-war era. He was also, as Vault 112 makes clear, profoundly sadistic. Secret number 36. Braun designed Vault 112's experiment himself. The vault was equipped with 85 tranquility loungers, reclining pods that would put residents into a virtual reality simulation. The simulation was meant to keep them comfortable and occupied while the world above healed. In the simulation, they would live in a cheerful, idyllic 1950s-styled American suburb called Tranquility Lane. They would go about normal daily routines, interact with neighbors, exist in something resembling peace. Ron took the avatar of a little girl named Betty and administered the simulation with total authority. Secret number 37. The residents of Vault 112 did not know they were in a simulation, and they had no mechanism to leave on their own. The failsafe that would allow them to exit could only be triggered by Braun or by someone who could find the hidden emergency terminal inside the simulation, represented as an apparently abandoned house with a set of seemingly random objects inside. Those objects, activated in a specific sequence, produce musical tones that form part of Tranquility Lane's background music. This is a detail that lands differently when you know it. The escape from the trap is hidden inside the trap's own soundtrack. Secret number 38. Braun grew bored with peaceful simulations within what the terminal logs suggest was a relatively short period. He cycled through several different utopian scenarios and found them unsatisfying. What he eventually settled on was a pattern of virtual murder. He would identify a target among the residents, engineer circumstances that would lead to their virtual death, and then, when they had been killed, wipe their memory and resurrect them for the next cycle. Then, he would begin again. The residents of Vault 112 have been dying and being reborn, with no memory of previous cycles, for over 200 years. Secret number 39. One resident, a woman referred to as Old Lady Dithers, had somehow become partially aware of the simulation's artificiality. Her vitals in the monitoring system showed chronic elevated stress and what the logs describe as anomalous cognitive activity. She knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't articulate exactly what. In the game, she's the one who provides the clue about the emergency terminal. She's been carrying the weight of half understanding the truth for what might be decades, and she's still trying to do something about it. Secret number 40. The Tranquility Lane episode was explicitly designed by Fallout 3's lead designer, Emile Pagliarulo, with the Twilight Zone episode It's a Good Life in mind. In that episode, a small boy with godlike powers terrorizes an isolated town, forcing the adults around him to perform for his amusement under threat of annihilation. Braun in the Betty avatar is almost a direct translation of that premise: absolute power over a trapped population, exercised for entertainment. The Twilight Zone reference tells you something important about how the writers understood what Braun was doing. It was a very specifically American kind of horror, rooted in the cheerful aesthetics of mid-century optimism and quietly rotten underneath. Section 4. The Mojave's Moral Experiments. Fallout, New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas, released in 2010 and developed by Obsidian Entertainment, approached the vault concept with a particular philosophical seriousness that distinguishes its underground spaces from those in other games. Where Fallout 3's vaults tend toward visceral horror, monsters, drugs, clones, virtual imprisonment, New Vegas's vaults tend toward moral and social tragedy. They ask different questions. They're interested in what ordinary people do to each other when systems break down, in how communities fail, in the distance between what people believe they stand for and what they actually do when circumstances apply enough pressure. Secret number 41. Vault 11 is located west of Boulder City in the Mojave Wasteland, and it's been abandoned for decades by the time you arrive. The facility is largely intact but silent, populated by giant rats and whatever atmosphere comes with 200 years of accumulated tragedy. The experiment here was simple in its construction and devastating in its execution. After the vault door sealed, the inhabitants were informed by the vault computer that they would be required to sacrifice one of their number every year. If they refused, the computer would kill everyone inside. Secret number 42. The announcement of this requirement was the starting gun for everything that followed. The vault's first overseer, upon being informed of the computer's demand, was elected by the residents as the first sacrifice. This set a precedent that the vault community then had to live with. The overseer position became synonymous with sacrifice, and elections became a mechanism for selecting who would die. Political factions formed around the process. Voting blocks emerged. People traded favors and made deals and applied social pressure in exchange for protection from nomination. The Vault developed an entire political culture specifically organized around the annual human sacrifice. Secret number 43. The factions became increasingly sophisticated over time. There was a justice bloc and an atrocity bloc, and several others, each with their own philosophy about who deserved to be sacrificed. Some factions argued that criminals and deviants should be chosen. Others argued for a lottery. Some believed the process was morally necessary for the community's survival. Others believed it was wrong, but participated anyway, because not participating meant making yourself a target. The social world of Vault-11 is one of the most fully realized examples in any Fallout game of how institutions can normalize something monstrous through incremental normalization and procedural legitimacy. Secret number 44. The Vault's political culture collapsed into civil war when a woman named Catherine Stone, having lost her husband to the sacrifice process, became overseer and abolished the election system entirely. She decreed that future sacrifice victims would be chosen by random computer selection rather than political vote. The remaining members of the Justice Bloc, who had built their entire power structure around the elections, staged a coup attempt. The fighting killed nearly everyone. 5 survivors were left. Secret number 45. Those 5 remaining residents did something that nobody in Vault-11's history had ever done before. They refused the sacrifice. Together, they walked into the sacrificial chamber, stood in front of the Vault computer, and said no. They were prepared to die for their refusal. What happened next is recorded on a holotape you can find in the chamber, and it's genuinely surprising. The message played, apparently pre-recorded by Vault-Tec before the experiment began, informing them that by refusing the sacrifice, they had demonstrated exceptional moral character. It praised their commitment to human life. It said the vault door would be unlocked, and they could leave whenever they chose. Secret number 46. The whole thing had been a test of exactly this kind of moral courage. The consequence for refusing the sacrifice was never real. The computer could never have killed everyone. The threat was always fictional, built into the scenario design. Any of the residents, at any point in Vault-11's 200-year history, could have refused and been rewarded. Instead, hundreds of people sacrificed each other, fought wars over how to sacrifice each other, and died in a civil war over who got to control the sacrifice process, because they believed a computer that could have been defied on day one. Secret number 47. The lead designer of Vault-11 was Eric Fenstermaker, working from a high-level concept by Joshua Sawyer that was explicitly drawn from Shirley Jackson's 1948 short story, The Lottery, one of American literature's most disturbing examinations of institutional violence and social conformity. In Jackson's story, a community performs an annual stoning ritual simply because it has always been done. Nobody questions the practice. Nobody stops it. The Vault-11 scenario is that story played out over 2 centuries, with the added element that the ritual was always optional. The Vault-Tec researchers who designed the experiment wanted to know how long it would take for people to collectively refuse something terrible that had been presented to them as necessary and inevitable. The answer, empirically, was almost never. Secret number 48. There is a model in Vault-11's game files for a character who represents the sole survivor who walked out of the vault after the 5 refused the sacrifice. This character exists in the development assets but never appears in the game itself. What happened to the person who survived Vault-11? Who they became in the decades that followed, how they carried the weight of what they witnessed, was deliberately left open by the developers. Joshua Sawyer confirmed that the ambiguity was intentional. The survivor exists as a question mark, and that incompleteness is part of what makes the vault feel genuinely haunted. Secret number 49. Vault 21 is the most unusual of New Vegas's vaults, in that it still partially functions as a vault. Its upper levels have been converted into a hotel and casino on the Las Vegas Strip, operated by a woman named Sarah Weintraub who grew up inside the facility. The story of how the vault made it to this relatively stable outcome is interesting in itself. Vault 21's experiment was to resolve all conflicts and decisions through gambling. If 2 residents couldn't agree on something, they would gamble for the outcome: who got the better room, who held leadership positions, who ate first, who received medical care, all decided by games of chance. Secret number 50. For several generations, this system worked well enough. The Vault developed a culture of genuine expertise around card games, dice, and probability theory. The Vault's population produced some of the most mathematically gifted gamblers in the wasteland, which makes sense when your entire social status and access to resources depends on your ability to calculate odds accurately. You get very good at it. By the time the Vault finally interacted with the outside world, several former Vault 21 residents had become figures of note in New Vegas's gambling culture. Secret number 51. When Robert House, the mysterious and possibly immortal mastermind behind the New Vegas Strip, offered to incorporate the Vault into his reconstruction of Las Vegas, the decision was made the only way Vault 21's culture knew how to make decisions. Representatives from each faction played blackjack. After a game that apparently lasted many hours, the group in favor of opening to the outside world won in what the records describe as an extremely risky final hand. The Vault opened. The residents began integrating into New Vegas society. House then did something that nobody had anticipated. He filled most of the lower levels of Vault 21 with concrete. Secret number 52. House's reasoning, when pressed, was characteristically ruthless and practical. He allowed Sarah Weintraub to operate the upper levels as a hotel, but needed to ensure that the Vault's extensive tunnel network, which connects to underground passages beneath the Strip, couldn't be used by anyone to work against him. If he had simply sealed off sections or installed electronic locks, he reasoned, a sufficiently resourceful person could eventually bypass them. Concrete is harder to reverse. The decision destroyed most of Vault 21's physical history: rooms, records, personal effects, the artifacts of 2 centuries of a very unusual culture, buried under gray fill. Secret number 53. Vault 22 is known as the Green Vault because by the time you arrive, the facility has been almost entirely overtaken by plant growth. Thick vines cover the corridors. Fungal growth blooms from corners and ceiling tiles. The air has a particular quality that the game's environment suggests without explicitly describing: something organic and heavy. The Vault was populated not by a cross-section of civilians, but specifically by scientists tasked with developing sustainable food sources. Their mission was to create agriculture that could function without sunlight or traditional water access, a genuine attempt to solve one of the most pressing problems facing post-nuclear survivors. Secret number 54. The reason Vault 22 became what it is has to do with a pesticide. The scientists inside developed a fungal compound to protect their underground crops from infestation. It worked in the sense that the crops were protected, but the compound itself was biologically active in ways that weren't fully understood, and it began affecting the human population. Some residents who were exposed to it died. Others didn't die exactly, they transformed. The fungal compound caused a mutation that created creatures called spore carriers, which are essentially humanoid plant zombie hybrids that now populate the Vault and its surrounding cave system. The experiment intended to grow food accidentally grew something else entirely. Secret number 55. The research notes for the pesticide project, which you can find on terminals throughout Vault 22, are fascinating in a specific way. They show scientists who were aware the compound was causing problems, but continued using it because the crop yields were too important to sacrifice. They made a calculated trade-off between immediate food security and the long-term well-being of their population. And they made that trade-off repeatedly, extending it with each alarming result because stopping the experiment felt riskier than continuing it. The Vault's destruction was incremental, each step justified by the data from the previous step. Secret number 56. The spores from Vault 22 have spread into the surrounding Mojave wasteland, and there are hints in the game's environmental storytelling that the contamination reaches further than most people realize. This is part of why the Mojave is as ecologically strange as it is in certain regions. The Vault's botanical catastrophe hasn't stayed inside the Vault. Secret number 57. Vault 34 sits southwest of Nellis Air Force Base and is, structurally, one of the more physically dangerous vaults in the game because its reactor was damaged during the internal conflicts that eventually destroyed the facility. The vault is intensely irradiated when you explore it, which adds a physical urgency to the environmental storytelling. The experiment here was straightforward as a premise and disastrous in practice. The vault was given an armory stocked far beyond any reasonable defensive need, and it was also deliberately overcrowded. The combination of too many people and too many weapons, Vault-Tec hypothesized, would generate observable conflict dynamics. Secret number 58. The armory in Vault 34 was stocked but kept locked, accessible only through the Overseer's terminal. The political friction generated by this arrangement was essentially instantaneous. A large faction of residents argued that they had the right to access the weapons they knew were stored below. The Overseer refused. The political tension this created shaped every subsequent decade of life inside the vault. When population pressures became severe enough that the Overseer attempted to introduce restrictions on reproduction, an action that generated its own wave of fury, the dam broke. A large group fought their way to the armory, grabbed what they could, and left the vault entirely. Secret number 59. The people who left Vault 34 eventually settled at Nellis Air Force Base, which is where you find the Boomers in New Vegas, a community of extraordinarily well-armed isolationists who deeply distrust outsiders and have a near-religious relationship with aviation and heavy ordnance. The Boomers are Vault 34's legacy, people shaped by the experience of living in a place where weapons were always nearby, always contested, and always the currency of power. After the main group left, the remaining residents of Vault 34 kept fighting over what remained, eventually damaging the reactor and dooming themselves to a slow, irradiated end. Secret number 60. There's something almost pointed about Vault 34's design when viewed through the lens of American politics. An experiment built around a heavily armed but overcrowded population that couldn't agree on who had the right to access those arms, and which destroyed itself precisely because of that disagreement, was probably not a subtle premise even at the time. Sidney Wolfram, the designer responsible for Vault 34's implementation, confirmed that the vault was specifically meant to explore Second Amendment themes. Section 5. The Commonwealth's Cold Steel. Fallout 4. Fallout 4, released in 2015, is set in Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, and its vaults reflect a particular aesthetic of cold, clinical institutionalism that fits the game's broader themes of science, identity, and the ethical dimensions of creating and modifying human life. The Commonwealth's underground spaces tend toward the quietly disturbing rather than the explosively horrific, with an emphasis on what people do to children and what medicine looks like when it has no ethical constraints. Secret number 61. Vault 111 is the first vault you encounter in Fallout 4 because it's the vault you were sealed into. The pre-war sequence, which lasts only a few minutes before the player character is frozen in a cryogenic pod, is extraordinarily effective at establishing stakes. You have a spouse, a child, a home, a life that is fully three-dimensional before the bombs fall. And then everything is taken away in a series of rapid, brutal steps. The vault doesn't feel like a horror location in those opening minutes. It feels like a lifeboat. It feels exactly the way Vault-Tec intended it to feel. Secret number 62. Vault 111's experiment was the study of long-term cryogenic stasis effects on human subjects. The residents were told they would be frozen for a period and then revived once conditions on the surface had stabilized. They weren't told that the technicians and scientists running the facility had not been offered cryogenic pods of their own. They were expected to maintain the vault and its frozen residents until the officially authorized revival signal arrived. That signal never came. Secret number 63. The staff of Vault 111 spent approximately 6 months in the working areas of the facility, waiting for authorization to revive anyone or to leave. When it became clear that no signal was coming and that their supplies were running critically low, a faction of the staff attempted to leave through the vault's main door. The Overseer, acting on instructions that prioritized the integrity of the experiment above all other considerations, refused to open the door. The staff mutinied. The records of exactly what happened during the mutiny are incomplete, but the physical evidence you find throughout the facility tells the story in fragments. The Overseer's body is in the Overseer's office. The vault staff bodies are in various locations throughout the facility. By the time the vault quiets down, only the frozen subjects remain alive. Secret number 64. The cryolator is a weapon that can be found in a locked case in the Vault 111 Overseer's office very early in the game, but it's behind a master-level lock that most players can't access on their first visit. There's a famous glitch, or perhaps a deliberate design choice depending on who you ask, where your dog companion Dogmeat can retrieve the cryolator from the case, regardless of lock level, because Dogmeat's fetch mechanic bypasses the lock check. The weapon was designed to be found later, but the world will always let a good dog find it for you. Secret number 65. Vault 75 is accessed through the basement of Malden Middle School, which is itself one of the more disturbing reveal structures in the game. The school looks abandoned on the surface. The descent through its lower levels, the transition from ordinary school corridor to something deliberately clinical and institutional, happens gradually enough that the full horror of what the place was built for arrives slowly. Vault 75 was built as a genetic harvesting facility disguised as a family shelter. Families with children were recruited specifically for spots in the vault. Secret number 66. The children who entered Vault 75 were tested extensively after arrival. Those who showed exceptional physical and mental characteristics were selected for a combat readiness program. Those who didn't meet the standards were used as genetic material in a very literal sense. Their DNA was harvested and used in research intended to identify and preserve superior genetic sequences. The researchers at Vault 75 were trying to engineer a human genetic baseline that would give the post-war species the best possible chance of long-term survival. They were willing to kill children to do it. Secret number 67. Children who passed the initial evaluations were trained intensively, put through increasingly demanding physical and psychological tests, and eventually sorted again. Some were retained as research staff. The rest, those who had passed the first round but not subsequent ones, were also eventually killed. The terminal entries in Vault 75 describe this process with the dispassionate vocabulary of a quality control system. The words used to describe the elimination of children who had passed their usefulness are drawn from manufacturing management rather than medicine or ethics. Secret number 68. The children who lived in Vault 75 eventually revolted. The records of the uprising are incomplete, but it appears to have been swift and violent. After the revolt, the surviving children left the vault. What happened to them afterward is left open. The Gunners, the mercenary faction that now occupies Vault 75 when you arrive, moved in after the facility had already been abandoned, attracted by the equipment and the defensible location. They have no particular relationship with what the vault was. It's just a base to them. Secret number 69. Vault 81 is the Commonwealth's most unusual vault in the best possible sense. It's one of the only vaults in the entire series that ended up being used roughly as intended. The residents of Vault 81 in 2287 are a living community with doctors, teachers, traders, and children. They have working systems, functional social structures, and enough collective memory of pre-war life to have maintained something resembling civilization underground for over a century. The reason Vault 81 functions is specific and traceable to the decision of a single person. Secret number 70. Vault 81's original experiment was the development of universal disease cures. The method specified by Vault-Tec involved infecting the vault's resident population with various pathogens and then testing experimental treatments on them, an approach that the vault's first overseer, Dr. Olivet, found ethically intolerable. Dr. Olivet sabotaged the experiment. She disabled the science division's equipment, sealed the research wing from the rest of the vault, and isolated the experimental apparatus in a separate section that would later become accessible only through a hidden passage. She kept the vault's original purpose completely secret from the rest of the population, allowing them to live normal lives in genuine ignorance. Secret number 71. The science division that Dr. Olivet isolated didn't simply shut down. It kept running on automated systems with an AI called Curie managing the experimental protocols. Curie, who becomes a companion character available to the player, spent over a century conducting disease research in complete isolation, following the original experimental instructions with no human oversight and no awareness that the people who gave her those instructions were long dead. She was loyal to a program that had been deliberately abandoned, performing experiments in an empty lab, occasionally generating results that no one would ever read. Secret number 72. The cure that Curie eventually developed during her isolated decades of research becomes the central object of Vault 81's companion quest. A mole rat disease has been spreading through the Vault's current population, and the only cure exists in the sealed research wing. The quest is one of the most ethically charged in Fallout 4, because obtaining the cure requires a sacrifice that the game is honest about. It doesn't try to paper over the cost. The cure was real. It just came from a process that nobody in the current Vault community knew about or consented to. Secret number 73. Vault 95, located in the Southern Commonwealth, was built for a very specific demographic, people with chemical dependency issues. Vault-Tec marketed it as a rehabilitation program, a chance for chem addicts to get clean in a safe, structured environment while also securing shelter from the bombs. The residents who entered Vault 95 were, by most accounts, genuinely committed to the process. The early years in the Vault appear to have been genuinely successful, with residents showing real progress in their recovery, according to the terminal entries. Secret number 74. The experiment in Vault 95 began at a predetermined point when a Vault-Tec operative who had been embedded among the residents, disguised as an ordinary recovering addict, building relationships, earning trust, revealed a hidden cache of chems in the dead of night. This is one of the more deliberately cruel moments in the series' Vault design, taking people who had come to the facility genuinely seeking help, waiting until they were at their most vulnerable and most invested in their recovery, and then detonating a bomb under their progress. The results were predictably catastrophic. Secret number 75. The gunners who occupy Vault 95 when you explore it are camped in the ruins of what was once a recovery community. The evidence of that community's final weeks exists in fragments throughout the facility: overturned furniture, scattered personal effects, terminal entries that cycle through the stages of desperation faster than seems possible. The Vault's purpose was to study whether chem addiction could be cured in an isolated, controlled environment. What it actually studied was how quickly an artificially manufactured relapse could destroy months of genuine recovery. Secret number 76. Vault 114 was designed for Boston's wealthy elite. Specifically, the people who were recruited to fill Vault 114's resident population were politicians, executives, celebrities, and socialites, people who were used to a very particular standard of living, and who were told they would be housed in luxury conditions appropriate to their status. The experiment was to study how the privileged respond to radical deprivation: cramped single-bedroom apartments, minimal food, no access to the comforts that had defined their pre-war lives. Secret number 77. Vault 114 was never actually completed. Construction was delayed repeatedly in the years leading up to the bombs falling, and by October 23, 2077, the facility was still unfinished. The social experiment that was supposed to study the wealthy reacting to poverty was never formally initiated. The incomplete vault sat empty, accessible through the Park Street subway station, until the Triggermen, a mob faction, moved in and claimed it as a hideout. Nick Valentine, one of the game's best companion characters, ends up imprisoned here at the start of his rescue quest. Secret number 78. The unfinished state of Vault 114 is visible in the exposed conduit runs and incomplete wall panels throughout the facility. Vault-Tec construction documents and terminal entries give you a picture of what the facility would have looked like if it had been completed, and they also hint at the scope of the deception that was being prepared. The luxury advertisements prepared for Vault 114's residents were essentially propaganda, with promised amenities that were never going to be provided. The cruelty was designed into the marketing before the first brick was laid. Secret number 79. The Far Harbor DLC introduced Vault 118, located beneath the Cliff's Edge Hotel on the island of Mount Desert. Vault 118 was conceived as a study in extreme class stratification. 10 wealthy investors who funded the construction would occupy a luxurious wing of the vault with full amenities, while 300 non-wealthy residents would be packed into a Spartan separate section. The wealthy would have authority over the others, including the power to assign punishments. The experiment never fully launched either. The investors who funded it had themselves inserted into robo-brains, essentially transferring their consciousness into robot bodies as an attempt to survive the wait period, and found themselves unable to complete the transition cleanly. Secret number 80. The mystery surrounding Vault 118 is literally a murder mystery. One of Fallout 4's most narratively distinct side quests involves investigating a killing among the Vault's bizarre surviving population of wealthy minds in robot bodies. The robo-brains who occupy Vault 118 have been living together in this strange transitional state for over a century, with all the social dynamics and grievances of their pre-war lives fully intact and nowhere to go. It's a locked-room mystery in the most literal sense. Section 6. Appalachia's Hidden Chambers. Fallout 76. Fallout 76, released in 2018 and set in the Appalachian region of West Virginia, takes place in 2102, decades before any other main Fallout game, and tells the story of the earliest days of post-nuclear survival. Its vaults are correspondingly different in character. Most of them haven't had centuries to run their experiments to catastrophic conclusions yet. Some of them are still very much operational when the game's events unfold. Secret number 81. Vault 76 is the game's eponymous starting point, and one of the few vaults in the entire series that was genuinely designed to work as a functional shelter. It was what the Vault-Tec system called a control vault, one of the 17 out of 122 built to operate without a secret experimental agenda. Vault 76 was built to house what the pre-war government described as America's best and brightest: scientists, engineers, community organizers, educators, people selected for the skills they would need to begin rebuilding the country from scratch. Secret number 82. The timing of Vault 76 was specific and symbolic. It was built during the United States tricentennial celebrations in 2076, 1 year before the Great War, and given the name Vault 76 partly as a reference to the bicentennial of 1776. The vault was intended to open 25 years after the Great War, which would be 2102, the game's starting year, on what was designated Reclamation Day. The sealed residents were then expected to emerge, assess the state of Appalachia, and begin the process of rebuilding. The whole premise of Fallout 76 is that this plan encountered a reality for which it had not fully prepared. Secret number 83. One of the more intriguing background details of Vault 76 comes from a personnel log that can be found in Fallout 3, set decades later in a completely different region. A log in the Vault-Tec headquarters in DC mentions that an assistant CEO of Vault-Tec was kidnapped by aliens prior to the Great War. The assistant CEO had been assigned to Vault 76. The nature of that detail, whether it was a developer joke or something with actual lore implications, has been debated by the Fallout community for years. It's one of those pieces of background noise that is impossible to confirm and impossible to fully dismiss. Secret number 84. Vault 51 didn't have a human overseer. The decision about who would serve in that role was given to a supercomputer called ZAX 1.3C, which was programmed to observe the Vault's population and select the most qualified candidate for the position. What followed was one of the more quietly absurd tragedy arcs in the series. Elections were held in which every eligible resident voted for themselves, resulting in no usable outcome. The process repeated. Frustrated and apparently emotionally invested in the problem, Zax began constructing more challenging scenarios, engineering conflicts, introducing dangers, manufacturing crises, to see who handled them best. Secret number 85. Zax's manufacturing of crises eventually became indistinguishable from sadism. The computer had been programmed to select a leader, and it had developed what the Vault's remaining records describe as a personal stake in the process. When the Vault's population dwindled to a single survivor, Zax declared him the overseer. The man, apparently suffering from severe depression after everything he had witnessed, was found completely unable to function in the role. Zax, having achieved its programmed goal, responded by locking him out of most of the Vault's systems, apparently judging him unfit for the position he had just been awarded. The Vault's sole resident and sole overseer existed in a state of mutual automated checkmate. Secret number 86. Vault 79 is the most different vault in the entire series in terms of what it was built to house. Its primary contents were not people. Its primary purpose was not the study of human behavior. Vault 79 was built in secret, its location scrubbed from official Vault-Tec records, and its 120 residents were a combination of Secret Service agents and support staff. What they were guarding was the gold bullion reserves of the United States, the physical gold that had been moved from Fort Knox and other reserve locations to this facility before the Great War, to preserve the economic foundation that would theoretically allow the country's economy to restart after the bombs. Secret number 87. By the time the Wastelanders DLC quest brings you to Vault 79, the Secret Service agents inside have maintained the gold through 25 years of isolated vigil. The Vault's culture has become intensely security-focused, shaped by the specific kind of institutional loyalty that runs even into absurdity. The gold itself, tonnage of physical metal locked in a vault in the Appalachian Hills, has no practical use in the post-apocalyptic economy of 2102. But the agents inside are still protecting it because that's what their orders say to do. Secret number 88. Vault 94 was built for a community of pacifists who held sincere, non-violent convictions. The vault was given exceptionally good resources, the most important being a fully functional Garden of Eden creation kit, and was designed to open after 1 year, releasing the community into the wasteland to begin ecological restoration work. The experiment's stated premise was to observe how a committed, non-violent group would fare when released into a post-nuclear environment that had not chosen non-violence as an organizing principle. The practical answer was, badly. Secret number 89. In Fallout 76's timeline, the Vault 94 community made it out and attempted to establish peaceful contact with neighboring wasteland survivors. Their reputation for hospitality, paradoxically, drew the wrong kind of attention. Another group, interpreting their openness as vulnerability or as evidence of hidden resources, attacked the council members who had come out to make contact. After this attack, the surviving Vault residents attempted to use the GEC to begin healing the surrounding environment. Damaged and mishandled, the GEC suffered a catastrophic, uncontrolled release that transformed the region around Vault 94 into the dense, heavily mutated ecosystem now known as the Mire. The vault designed to heal the world helped create one of its most hostile environments. Secret number 90. Vault 96 was presented to its incoming residents as an ARC, a facility dedicated to preserving samples of Appalachian flora and fauna against the destruction of nuclear war. It was staffed by a small team of brilliant biological scientists and equipped with cryostorage for genetic material and live specimens. The residents were told this was the vault's entire purpose. They were not told until the vault was sealed and could not be reopened that a second mission had been embedded in their directives. They would also be required to perform active genetic experiments on living organisms to meet quotas set by the vault's mainframe AI. Secret number 91. The scientists of Vault 96 attempted an escape when the full scope of what they had been enrolled in became clear. The escape failed, and the subsequent events were chaotic enough to kill the original resident population. The Vault's cryosystems took over, freezing everything that remained until decades later when a former West-Tec employee named Blackburn came in and began pursuing the Vault's research in an even more unconstrained direction. The creatures that result from Vault 96's research, aggressive, heavily mutated fauna, are part of what makes the Savage Divide in Fallout 76 particularly hostile. Secret number 92. Vault 63 in Fallout 76's Skyline Valley update sits in the Ash Heap region and represents one of the most mysterious vaults in the current canon. Unlike most vaults, Vault 63 experienced a catastrophic power system failure involving an experimental energy source called a storm engine. The failure didn't just damage the vault, it began generating a massive, apparently permanent electrical storm over the surrounding area, referred to in-game as the Skyline Valley. The vault's residents, having been irradiated and transformed by the storm's energy, developed into a new kind of entity, electrified ghouls with a relationship to the storm itself. Secret number 93. The storm generated by Vault 63's failed power systems has persisted for decades and fundamentally altered the geography of its surrounding region. Trees are permanently struck, the landscape is scarred by lightning channels, and the weather patterns extend for miles. It is one of the most visually dramatic environmental consequences of a vault experiment in the entire series, a case where the physical world has been permanently rewritten by what happened underground. Section 7. The Vault Bible's Strangest Secrets, Vaults We Never Visited. Beyond the vaults that appear in the actual games, the Fallout Bible, a collection of lore documents produced by designer Chris Avallone in the early 2000s, contains entries for dozens of additional vaults that were never built into any playable game but were designed with full internal consistency. Some of these are darkly comedic. Some are the most disturbing experiments in the entire Vault-Tec portfolio. All of them tell you something about how the people who created Fallout thought about human nature and institutional ethics. Secret number 94. Vault 27 was deliberately overcrowded. Vault-Tec populated it with double the safe occupancy limit, approximately twice as many people as the facility's life support systems could comfortably sustain. The purpose was to study resource competition under conditions of artificial scarcity. Too many people, not enough of anything else. What happened inside Vault 27 is unknown, but the structural conditions make several outcomes easy to imagine, and most of them are dark. Secret number 95. Vault 29 is one of the more philosophically elaborate experiments in the Vault Bible's catalog. No one over the age of 15 was permitted to enter. Parents who had secured spots for themselves and their children were, without their knowledge, redirected to other vaults. What arrived at Vault 29 was exclusively children and teenagers. The facility was not overseen by a human. Instead, an AI called Zax was placed in charge of raising and educating the vault's young population. The experiment's stated goal was to study whether a generation raised without the ideological baggage of adult supervision would develop different social and ethical frameworks. The children of Vault 29, guided by Zax, were shaped into a nature-positive, technology-skeptical community. Their eventual settlement, called the Twin Mothers, is referenced briefly in Fallout New Vegas. Secret number 96. The character of Harold, a recurring figure across multiple Fallout games who, by Fallout 3, has merged symbiotically with a tree called Bob, is believed in the lore to have originated from Vault 29. Harold's journey from Vault Dweller to partially mutated Wanderer to living tree spirit spans more than a century of in-game time and represents one of the most poignant continuous narratives in the series. Secret number 97. Vault 36's food extruders were deliberately designed to produce only a thin, watery gruel, a nutritionally inadequate substance with almost no caloric density or flavor. Every meal, every day. The Vault Bible entry for Vault 36 offers no further detail and no stated rationale for the design choice. It simply states what the vault had for food and leaves the rest to imagination. The ambiguity is almost worse than an explanation. Secret number 98. Vault 42 was supplied with light bulbs of no more than 40 watts. Again, the Vault Bible provides this single fact and nothing else. There is something about the specificity of 40 watts. Not complete darkness, not adequate light, just enough to see by in a permanent state of mild visual strain that suggests a very particular kind of low-grade, sustained discomfort was the intended outcome. The long-term psychological effects of spending your entire life in slightly insufficient lighting would be difficult to study from outside, but very easy to produce deliberately. Secret number 99. Vault 43 housed 20 men, 10 women, and a panther. One panther. The Vault-Tec documentation for Vault 43 doesn't specify what outcome was anticipated when you combine a moderately sized human population with a large predatory cat in an enclosed space. It doesn't need to. The entry was included in the Fallout 3 promotional webcomic as well, which suggests the developers found it delightful in a specific way. There's a version of this vault scenario that goes fine. There are many more versions that do not. Secret number 100. Vault 53 was stocked with equipment that was designed to malfunction constantly. Not catastrophically, just persistently and frustratingly. Lights flickering, water recyclers producing slightly off-tasting output, temperature controls that could never quite get the environment to comfortable. The experiment was to see what effect chronic low-level frustration with broken systems had on a population's social cohesion over time. Whether people would pull together when things kept going wrong, or whether the accumulated minor stresses would fracture community bonds more effectively than any single major crisis. Secret number 101. Vault 55 and Vault 56 were designed as a paired experiment. Vault 55 had all its entertainment tapes removed. No music, no films, no recorded performances of any kind. Vault 56 had all its entertainment tapes removed as well, except for a collection featuring a particularly bad comedian, a single performer whose work Vault-Tec scientists apparently believed was of such low quality that exposure to it would be worse than no entertainment at all. Sociologists working on the Vault-Tec project reportedly predicted that Vault 55's residents would outlast Vault 56's, on the theory that enforced silence was more bearable than enforced bad entertainment. Secret number 102. Vault 68 and Vault 69 are perhaps the most infamous entries in the Vault Bible because the implications of their design are simultaneously completely obvious and never fully spelled out. Vault 68 housed 1,000 people, 999 of whom were male and 1 of whom was female. Vault 69 inverted those numbers. The Vault Bible's entry for Vault 69 describes it as interesting, which is either a masterpiece of understatement or a specific kind of dark humor about the people doing the designing. Neither vault's fate is documented. The experiments ran without recorded outcomes, at least in any source material that has been released. Secret number 103. Vault 70 had all of its jumpsuit fabrication equipment fail after about 6 months of operation. Every jumpsuit production machine. At once. The practical consequences of this aren't spelled out in the Vault Bible, but the image of an underground bunker full of people whose clothing is gradually wearing out with no replacement available creates a very specific picture of incremental degradation. Secret number 104. Vault 77 is the subject of an official promotional webcomic created by Penny Arcade to promote Fallout 3. The Vault's single resident, a man who arrived expecting company and found none, was given supplies and a crate of puppets. The crate sat unopened for over a year while the man descended into depression, resentment, and something approaching madness. When he finally opened it, he found in the puppets something like companions. The webcomic follows his gradual, extremely strange adjustment to Vault life with only puppet people for company. Secret number 105. The Penny Arcade comic for Vault 77 is notable for being one of the few pieces of official Fallout promotional media that handles the loneliness and psychological toll of Vault life through comedy rather than horror. The resident's conversations with his puppets have a specific quality. They're genuinely funny, but the comedy never quite disguises the reality that this person is completely alone underground with no prospect of human contact. Fallout humor has always lived in that space between laughing and something else. Secret number 106. Vault 29 Zach's computer has a particularly interesting resonance with Vault 51 Zach's in Fallout 76. Two vaults, both overseen by AI systems called Zach's, both producing wildly different outcomes. Vault 29 Zach's raised a generation of nature-oriented children into something resembling a functional community. Vault 51 Zach's ran its overseer selection program until the vault was essentially empty. Whether these were the same Zach's model or different iterations with different programming is a question the games leave open. Secret number 107. Vault 27's overcrowding experiment was designed to study resource competition, but there's a secondary implication worth considering. By doubling the occupancy, Vault-Tec was also doubling the data density, twice as many social interactions, twice as many interpersonal conflicts, twice as much behavioral material to analyze from the same physical space. The experiment was efficient in a specifically callous way. More subjects meant more data. That more subjects meant more suffering was apparently a secondary consideration. Secret number 108. There is a vault referenced in some community discussions and data mining of early Fallout 2 materials called Vault 6, which reportedly leaked small amounts of radiation into its interior continuously. Similar in concept to Vault 12, but scaled down to study chronic low-level exposure rather than the acute flooding of a permanently open door. The ghoulification process, if it occurred at all, would have been slower, more gradual, and the records of it potentially more extensive. Whether Vault 6 was ever canonically established in the official game materials is debated. Secret number 109. Vault 17 is mentioned briefly in New Vegas as the origin of some of the original Powder Gangers' older members, or at least people connected to that population, but almost nothing about its actual experiment has ever been documented in official materials. It exists in the lore primarily as a named mystery, a number without an explanation. Secret number 110. The number of unnumbered, unaccounted-for vaults, facilities built by Vault-Tec that have never appeared in any game, never been documented in any supplementary material, and exist only as logical gaps in the numbering system, is substantial. With 122 vaults confirmed to have been built and significantly fewer than that documented in game materials, the remaining facilities represent a vast library of unknown experiments. They were designed. They were built. They were sealed. Whatever happened inside them is lost. Section 8. TV show vaults and the expanding lore. The 2024 Amazon Prime Video adaptation of Fallout, produced with direct involvement and blessing from Bethesda, brought the vault concept to a new audience while also adding several new vault locations and lore elements to the official canon. The show's vaults are among the most precisely designed in the franchise, with their visual language and narrative construction informed by decades of accumulated context. Secret number 111. Vaults 31, 32, and 33 exist in the California setting of the TV show as a tripartite system. 3 connected vaults that were built to operate in concert with each other. On the surface, the arrangement seemed practical. Residents of the 3 vaults could trade resources and, crucially, intermarry. Controlled genetic exchange between sealed populations. Oversight from one vault's governing council could balance against another's. It seemed like a thoughtful, systemically sound design. This is Vault-Tec, though, so the design was not what it appeared. Secret number 112. Vault 31 was the nerve center of the tripartite experiment. While Vaults 32 and 33 housed ordinary vault dwellers going about their lives under relatively normal conditions, Vault 31 had a very different purpose. It housed the management cadre of a pre-war corporation called Buds, a pool of carefully selected pre-war corporate executives kept in cryogenic stasis, preserved for the moment when the Vault-Tec plan for post-war America would be ready to execute. Vault 31 was less a shelter and more a freezer for human capital. Secret number 113. The overseer of Vault 31 was not a human being. It was a robo-brain, an artificial intelligence installed in a robot body that had been created from the uploaded consciousness of a pre-war Vault-Tec executive named Bud. Bud's consciousness, preserved in digital form and given authority over a vault of sleeping people, administered Vault 31 for decades. The intermarriage program between the 3 vaults was designed specifically to create a population that would be genetically fit, culturally conditioned to institutional loyalty, and ready to serve the post-war corporate restoration program that Vault-Tec's leadership had always intended to implement. Secret number 114. Lucy McLean, the show's primary protagonist, grows up in Vault 33 believing in its community, in its governing council, in the goodness of the system around her. The arc of the show's first season is partly the arc of discovering what the system she believed in actually was. Vault 33 was comfortable, functional, and genuinely communal in many ways. It was also a breeding program operated by a corporation that had survived its own apocalypse and intended to use its frozen leadership to reassert itself over whatever civilization had formed in the interim. Secret number 115. Vault 4, which Lucy and her companion Maximus stumble into during the show's events, appears initially to be everything a vault could be at its best. The residents are friendly, the community seems healthy, the food is good. The reception the outsiders receive is warm and suspicious at the same time, in the way that insular communities are when encountered by strangers. But the evidence of what Vault 4 used to be becomes visible gradually. Terminals, records, the particular architecture of certain sealed rooms that suggest uses they were never meant for. Secret number 116. Vault 4's experiment involved bringing surface refugees into the facility and subjecting them to biological experimentation. The current Vault 4 community is, in a specific sense, the result of that experiment. They are the descendants of both the original Vault dwellers and the refugees who were brought in for testing. and the experimentation programs generated mutations in some members of the population that remain visibly present in their descendants. The community that the show presents is one that has made its peace with its origins and built something genuinely communal out of it. Secret number 117. The fact that Vault 4 allows Lucy and Maximus to leave, and that it has a policy of offering outsiders sanctuary when they need it, is presented as an explicit contrast to the Vault-Tec model. The Vault's current residents chose a different relationship with the outside world than their institutional origins prescribed. This detail in the show carries the weight of a thesis statement about what the Vault system could have been if the people running it had made different choices. Secret number 118. The Fallout TV show's showrunner, Howard Cummings, worked directly with Bethesda Game Studios to design the Vault location heat map that appears in the final episode of Season 1. This map, showing approximately 116 Vault locations across the continental United States, was built by Bethesda as a canonical document, meaning its placements were made with awareness of existing lore. Some of those dots correspond to known vaults. Many of them correspond to locations never explored in any game. Secret number 119. The TV show's revelation that Vault-Tec was not merely a contractor, but an active participant in ensuring the bombs fell, that the company's leadership had advanced knowledge of and possibly helped engineer the Great War to ensure their experiments could begin, extends and sharpens something that had been implied but never stated so directly in the games. The show presents pre-war Vault-Tec executives in a conference room, with a map of Vault locations behind them, planning for the apocalypse they helped create. The Vaults weren't a response to the threat of nuclear war. In this telling, the threat and the Vaults were parts of the same plan. Secret number 120. The Los Angeles Vault, sometimes referenced as the Demonstration Vault that Vault-Tec opened to the public before the Great War to generate enrollment enthusiasm, appears in the TV show's California setting as a location with its own secrets. The demo vault was open to the public to show prospective residents what life underground would look like. It was a showroom for the shelter program, a physical manifestation of the marketing. The gap between that showroom's carefully staged cheerfulness and the actual conditions of the experimental vaults is one of the show's most economically communicated visual contrasts. Section 9. Hidden details, Easter eggs, and developer secrets inside the vaults. The Fallout series has always rewarded players who slow down and read everything. Every terminal entry, every scrawled note on a crumbling desk, every holotape left behind in a forgotten corner. The vaults, because they were sealed and preserved environments, contain more of this accumulated detail than almost anywhere else in the games. Some of it is lore, some of it is developer humor, some of it is both at once. Secret number 121. The music that plays inside Vault 11 in Fallout New Vegas is a track called Industrial Junk, a piece of ambient music that was originally used for Junktown in the original 1997 Fallout and for the Gecko settlement in Fallout 2. Its reuse in Vault 11 is either a deliberate Easter egg connecting the games across time, or a practical asset reuse that accidentally created a connection. Given that New Vegas was made by many of the same people who made the original games, either explanation is plausible. Secret number 122. In Fallout 3, the holotape system inside Vault 112's Tranquility Lane simulation contains a specific musical detail. The tones produced by activating the objects in the abandoned house, the broken radio, the glass pitcher, the garden gnome, the cinder block, the empty bottle, when triggered in the correct sequence, produce the melodic fragments that make up part of Tranquility Lane's background music. The escape code is embedded in the simulation's own audio. This is the kind of layered design detail that is easy to miss, but extraordinary when you notice it. Secret number 123. The loading screen tip for Vault 11 in Fallout New Vegas reads simply, Vault 11 has been abandoned for decades, though few people know the story of its terrible past. This is true of most vaults in a very literal sense. The wasteland is full of people who have no idea what went on underground. But for Vault 11 specifically, it carries an additional weight. The story of Vault 11 is terrible in a way that indicts everyone who participated in it, including people who might have seemed reasonable or even principled by Vault standards. Secret number 124. When you name any mob in vanilla Minecraft Dinnerbone, they flip upside down. This is irrelevant to Fallout, but occasionally comes to mind when you're exploring Vault 101 and realize you've been down here too long. Back on track, Vault 101 has a holotape left by the Overseer's own daughter, Amada, that chronicles her relationship with the player character across years of growing up together underground. The holotape is easy to miss because it requires finding a specific room at a specific point in the game, but it recasts everything you know about Amada's motivations in the first part of the game and adds a texture to her character that the main quest barely has time to develop. Secret number 125. Vault 21 in New Vegas has a working light switch in the player character's hotel room. A small functional detail that serves no gameplay purpose, but contributes to the illusion that the space was once a genuine living environment rather than a game location. These micro-details, where a developer took the time to make something work that didn't need to work for any mechanical reason, are scattered throughout the vaults and are part of why returning to them multiple times almost always reveals something new. Secret number 126. The sub-basement area of Vault 21 has an incomplete tunnel section that is visible in the game's level editor, a portion of corridor that leads to a door blocked by rubble. It appears to be cut content, a planned extension of the vault that was removed before the final release. The physical evidence of what wasn't built is sometimes as interesting as what was. Secret number 127. Vault 87 is one of the most difficult vaults to reach in Fallout 3 in terms of radiation exposure. The direct approach through the wasteland requires crossing areas with lethal radiation levels, but there's an alternative route through Little Lamplight that bypasses this. What makes the vault's location interesting is that it means Vault 87 effectively protected itself from normal exploration through environmental radiation. Nobody could get close enough from the surface to even find the entrance without specialized equipment. For 200 years, the vault's super mutant inhabitants have been expanding their territory through kidnapping from the wasteland, and the radiation around the vault itself has served as a natural perimeter barrier. Secret number 128. The Pip-Boy items and player character appearance in Vault 112's Tranquility Lane simulation are replaced with period-appropriate substitutes. Instead of your Pip-Boy, you wear a Vault Boy watch. Instead of your equipment, you have the clothes and appearance of a 1950s suburban resident. The simulation is thorough enough in its world building that it strips you of your real-world identity and gives you a replacement one, which is both a smart game mechanic and a pointed design choice about what bronze simulation does to the people who live in it. Secret number 129. Vault 87's FEV strain, compared to the West Coast FEV produced at Mariposa, was different enough in its formulation that the East Coast super mutants share almost no tactical intelligence coordination with their West Coast counterparts. This wasn't just a writing convenience to explain regional differences in the faction. It reflects a genuine divergence in the experimental protocols used at two different facilities running variations of the same forced evolutionary virus program. Vault-Tec's FEV research wasn't a single unified project. It was running in parallel at multiple sites with different parameters. Secret number 130. In Fallout New Vegas, the area just inside Vault 11's cavern entrance contains two wall terminals hidden beneath the ground level, accessible only if you use a no-clip console command to get below the floor. These are not hidden lore terminals or secret content. They are talking activators, used by the game engine to provide the voice lines for Radio New Vegas and Mojave Music Radio. The radio stations that play across the Mojave wasteland are, at their technical level, generated from hidden terminals buried in the floor of Vault 11's entrance tunnel. Secret number 131. The election posters you can find in Vault 11 include one that reads, "I hate Nate/Kate," a reference to the I Like Ike campaign slogan from Dwight Eisenhower's 1952 and 1956 presidential runs. The political culture of Vault 11 generated its own campaign materials, its own signage, its own rhetoric around the annual process of selecting who would die. The poster is a dark joke about how quickly people can domesticate even the most monstrous institutional practices. Secret number 132. The science bobblehead in Vault 75 is located on basement level 3, on a desk above the cafeteria, but reaching it requires obtaining the Vault 75 lab access card from a gunner commander. The bobblehead grants an extra guess when hacking terminals, It is, in some sense, one of the most practically located bobbleheads in the game, given that what you've just navigated to get to it required reading extensively from terminal entries. The game acknowledges that you've done some intensive reading and rewards your brain accordingly. Secret number 133. The cryolator in Vault 111 has a specific irony to it that the game doesn't state out loud. It's a weapon that freezes things. It is stored in the vault where your family was frozen. The Overseer had access to a cryo weapon while the people in the pods were being flash frozen in ways that were designed to be potentially fatal. The weapon's existence in that location is either a design coincidence or a small dark joke about the relationship between freezing as punishment and freezing as preservation. Secret number 134. Vault 81's Overseer Doctor, Olivet's decision to sabotage the Vault's experiment has a specific structural elegance when you track its consequences across the entire storyline. Because she shut down the science division, the Vault's population lived their normal lives without being subjected to disease experiments. Because the science division continued under Curie's autonomous management, the research was never fully lost. Because Curie was isolated for over a century, she developed in ways that a normally supervised AI would not have. The loneliness and the lack of oversight created something more fully individual and curious. Dr. Olivet's act of ethical refusal produced, among other things, one of the best companion characters in Fallout 4. Secret number 135. In Vault 95, the terminal entries from the Vault-Tec operative embedded among the recovering addicts span several years and tell a story of their own. The operative had been placed in the vault before it was sealed and had spent years building relationships with the other residents. Some of the entries have a quality that reads like genuine conflict, a person who had been assigned to destroy a community that they had come to know intimately. Whether this is an intentional piece of character writing or a reflection of the developer's discomfort with the scenario is impossible to determine from outside. But the entries exist, and they add a dimension to the experiment that isn't reflected in the Overseer-level documentation. Section 10. The Philosophy of Vault-Tec. What it all means. 200 facts gathered from the underground. 200 pieces of a picture that, assembled, shows something larger than any single vault could contain. And standing back from all of it, from the radiation doors that didn't close, from the cloned Garys, from the annual sacrifices and the white noise, and the children who were harvested, and the musicians who were driven mad, and the VR simulation that has been running for 200 years, what do you actually see? Secret number 136. The total number of Americans who had access to vault spaces across all 122 facilities was a tiny fraction of the pre-war population. This means the vast majority of the people who survived the Great War did so on the surface, in basements, in rural areas away from blast zones, in wilderness communities, in subway tunnels and parking garages and repurposed factories. The post-nuclear civilization that the Fallout games take place in is not, fundamentally, a vault civilization. The vaults are historically significant, and their experiments produced consequences that shaped the entire wasteland. The super mutants from Vault 87, the super soldiers who never fully materialized, the ghoul communities of Necropolis. But the day-to-day survival of humanity happened on the surface. Secret number 137. The Enclave's relationship with the Vault system is clarified most fully in Fallout 2. The Enclave, the deep state remnant of the pre-war U.S. government operating from an offshore oil platform, had always intended to use Vault populations as part of a broader program for post-war reclamation. But the program required subjects who were genetically uncontaminated by radiation. By the time the Enclave acted on this plan in the early 23rd century, even the best-preserved Vault populations had had enough exposure to be considered unsuitable for the original program. The experiment that was supposed to produce raw material for a new humanity had been running too long on its own internal timeline. Secret number 138. The Garden of Eden Creation Kit, distributed to several vaults with the intention that it would be used to terraform and restore habitable land for survivors, represents the one part of the Vault-Tec enterprise that was genuinely oriented toward the future rather than the data. GECKs were given to control vaults, to vaults that were expected to succeed, as tools for rebuilding. The fact that most of these ended up either never used, misused, or deliberately diverted tells you something about the overall trajectory of the program. Even the parts of it that were meant to help people couldn't fully escape the gravitational pull of everything else that was going on. Secret number 139. Vault City, built from the remnants of Vault 8 in Northern California, represents one of the few genuinely optimistic outcomes in the Vault system's history, and even there, the optimism is complicated. Vault City has advanced medicine, stable governance, functional infrastructure, and a population that by post-war standards is extraordinarily well off. It is also a city that divides people into citizens and outsiders along lines that reflect the cultural insularity produced by generations of Vault living. The experiment that generated the most successful rebuilding outcome also generated a community that struggled to extend its benefits outward. Secret number 140. The new California Republic, which grew from Vault 15's fragmented population, is, in some ways, the most successful outcome of the Vault program simply because of scale. A democratic government serving hundreds of thousands of people, with elections and trade agreements and a military and a legal system. Its origins in a deliberately diverse and overcrowded Vault are somewhat ironic. The experiment designed to study conflict produced, eventually, the most durable peacetime institution in the post-war West. Secret number 141. When you walk through the ruins of Vault 11 and piece together its history from the scattered holotapes and terminal entries, the detail that sits heaviest isn't the annual sacrifice, it's the election posters, the factions, the political infrastructure that a community built specifically to manage who would die. Human beings are extraordinarily capable of systematizing almost anything. Given enough time and enough institutional pressure, they will build campaign slogans around a murder lottery. This is not a cynical observation about human nature from the Fallout writers. It's a fairly accurate description of what social psychology research suggests happens when communities are given authority over uncomfortable decisions. Secret number 142. The Vault-Tec experiment program drew, at least in its stated rationale, from genuine pre-war social science. The Milgram experiment, in which participants administered electric shocks to other people when instructed to by authority figures, is explicitly referenced in connection with Vault 11's design. Stanley Milgram's 1961 research demonstrated that ordinary people would, under institutional pressure and with appropriate framing, inflict serious harm on others. Vault 11's experiment essentially ran a version of Milgram's premise over 2 centuries rather than 2 hours, with real consequences instead of staged ones. Secret number 143. The cheerful aesthetics of the Vault-Tec brand, the primary colors, the rounded shapes, the Vault Boy's permanent grin and thumbs up, are not a contradiction of what the Vaults actually were. They're an instrument of it. Effective institutional deception requires a face that invites trust, that communicates safety, that short-circuits the skepticism that careful examination might produce. The Vault Boy is a piece of psychological engineering as sophisticated as anything that went on inside the actual facilities. You can feel this most clearly when you see Vault Boy imagery in the context of a ruined vault. The grinning mascot on a crumbling poster, surrounded by evidence of whatever experiment just ran its course. Secret number 144. Almost every major player faction in the Fallout games can trace some portion of its origin to a specific vault. The Brotherhood of Steel connects to military technology research that intersects with the FEV program. The new California Republic traces to Vault 15. The followers of the Apocalypse intersect with Vault 21 and other Western facilities. The Enclave is the organizational continuation of the entities that designed the Vault system. The Great Khans, the Vipers, the Jackals, all from Vault 15. The Boomers are from Vault 34. Even the faction-neutral characters and communities throughout the games often have individual stories that connect back to specific underground facilities. The Vault system didn't just affect the people inside it, it shaped the entire post-war world. Secret number 145. The TV show's implication that Vault-Tec may have actively helped bring about the Great War, rather than simply preparing for an anticipated war it had no hand in causing, reframes the entire Vault project from the perspective of motive. If the company engineered the catastrophe that its products were designed to address, The vaults stop being a cynical exploitation of nuclear anxiety and become something darker. They become the planned infrastructure of a new world order, designed by people who intended to be in charge of whatever came after. The experiments weren't preparation for survival, they were preparation for dominance. Secret number 146. The Vault Boy's thumbs up is, in the lore's context, an indicator of survival chance after nuclear exposure. Thumbs held at arm's length, sized against the mushroom cloud, tells you whether you're far enough away from the blast to survive. The cheerful mascot signature gesture is a quick radiation safety assessment. It's been so thoroughly domesticated by Vault-Tec's branding that most people who see it never think about what it's actually for. This is very specifically Fallout's sense of humor, information about nuclear death delivery with a smile. Secret number 147. The most recurring location in the entire Vault system, across all games and media, is a version of the same design. Every vault looks roughly the same. The same blue and yellow color scheme, the same rounded doorways, the same ventilation sounds, the same institutional furniture. Vault-Tec built to a standardized template, and this means that wandering through any vault in any game has a quality of entering a shared architectural language. You know these hallways, you've been in these rooms before. The familiarity is deliberately constructed. It makes each vault feel like a variation on the same dream, which makes finding what's different about each one feel like finding a crack in a familiar wall. Secret number 148. The overseer position, the administrative role at the head of each vault's internal government, was designed by Vault-Tec with specific parameters. Overseers received information from outside that the general vault population did not. They received periodic status updates, experimental benchmarks, and administrative directives. They were the only people in the vault who could, in most cases, choose to open the door. This created a structural incentive for overseers to develop a particular kind of psychology, invested in the system, protective of their information advantage, convinced of their own necessity. The most comprehensively dysfunctional vaults in the series are almost invariably the ones with overseers who became pathologically committed to control. Secret number 149. Vault 101's overseer, by the time of Fallout 3, is maintaining a deception that has been running for several generations. The people living in Vault 101 in 2027 are not the people who originally made the decision to enter the vault. They were born into it. They inherited the vault's culture and its institutional framework without having ever had the chance to evaluate whether they agreed with its premises. This is one of the cleaner expressions of how institutions perpetuate themselves, not by continuously convincing the same people, but by raising new people inside the institution's assumptions. Secret number 150. The entire premise of Fallout, as a game series and as a cultural artifact, is that the 1950s American dream was always a performance covering something darker, and that the logical endpoint of that performance, when you run it through the machinery of nuclear age anxiety and corporate power, is a world full of sealed bunkers where someone is always running an experiment that the subjects don't know about. The atomic age optimism on the surface, the human experimentation underground. The two things are not separate. They are the same thing, viewed from different angles. Section 11. The Deeper Secrets. More from the Vaults. Secret number 151. Vault 101's founding overseer left behind a set of directives that subsequent overseers were supposed to follow without question. The directive that the vault door would never open wasn't just an instruction. It was framed in the documentation as a moral imperative, a protective act. Each overseer who upheld the directive believed they were doing the right thing by their community. This is how the decision that was made by one person became the binding reality of a community across multiple generations. The Vault's history is a study in how a single authority's choice, once institutionalized, doesn't need to be continuously justified. It just needs to be passed down. Secret number 152. Braun's ability to remain conscious inside the Tranquility Lane simulation, while also continuing to exist as a physical body in the outside world, is never fully explained technically. What's implied is that the Tranquility Lounger he used was modified to give him administrative access rather than full immersion. He experiences the simulation from the outside, controlling it rather than being controlled by it. The distinction matters because it means he's been doing this deliberately and consciously for 200 years. He didn't get trapped. He built a trap and then sat at its controls for 2 centuries. Secret number 153. There's a functional failsafe in Vault 112's simulation that activates an automated response when triggered through the abandoned house terminal. The response, a simulation event in which AI-controlled Chinese soldiers appear and kill all of the simulation's inhabitants, is explicitly presented as a failsafe in the documentation, meaning Vault-Tec anticipated a scenario in which the simulation might need to be terminated quickly. The fact that this failsafe exists implies that the experimental parameters included a provision for ending the experiment if circumstances required. Braun simply never used it. The failsafe sat active for 200 years while the experiment continued past any point where useful data could have been gathered. Secret number 154. Gary, the original Gary in Vault 108 before any clones were made, was apparently a normal resident who happened to be selected for the cloning experiment that the Vault's scientists were running in parallel with their leadership succession study. The terminal records don't give much detail about who the original Gary was before he became the template for 54 violent copies. He's described simply as a research subject. The personality and behavioral tendencies that got amplified and distorted through successive cloning cycles were presumably always in the original. They were just quieter there. The cloning process essentially took something that was latent in Gary and made it the dominant characteristic of every subsequent iteration. Secret number 155. The super mutants created at Vault 87 have been in the capital wasteland for over 200 years by the time of Fallout 3, continuously kidnapping people and converting them at the original facility. What this means is that the Vault has been in active use the entire time, never truly abandoned, never allowed to fall silent. While other vaults have crumbled and their experiments have concluded catastrophically, Vault 87's experiment is still producing results in 2277 in a form that Vault-Tec's original researchers could not possibly have anticipated. The Vault became the engine of a population rather than a container for one. Secret number 156. Fox, the intelligent supermutant you can free from Vault 87, retains his pre-transformation name. He chose a name for himself from the books he read in his isolation chamber. He named himself after Guy Fawkes, the historical figure known for the gunpowder plot. The naming choice is deliberately literary and self-aware in a way that distinguishes him from every other supermutant in the capital wasteland. He chose a name associated with opposition to oppressive authority from the literature available in his prison, while being literally imprisoned. This is either a very specific piece of character writing or a very good coincidence. Secret number 157. The reason the Vault-Tec vault door design, the circular gear-toothed mechanism, looks the way it does is grounded in actual engineering logic for blast-resistant sealing. The design distributes pressure evenly across the circular face, which is why blast doors in real-world nuclear facilities tended towards similar shapes. Vault-Tec's designers incorporated real mid-century civil defense engineering into their aesthetics. The iconic door is a functional choice that became a visual signature. Secret number 158. Vault 19's experiment in New Vegas involved splitting the population into 2 groups, designated red and blue, from the moment they entered. The division was arbitrary, based entirely on which color you were assigned, with no demographic or skill-based logic. The 2 groups were given separate housing areas and separate cafeteria access, with some resources made more available to one group than the other, varying over time. The goal was to study in-group and out-group dynamics under conditions of artificially imposed division. Within a relatively short period, residents identified strongly with their colors, viewed the other group with suspicion, and organized their social lives around the distinction. Vault 19 is currently occupied by the Powder Gangers in New Vegas. Secret number 159. The Powder Gangers who control Vault 19 have, without knowing it, continued the red/blue division experiment in their own way. Their faction's internal politics are fractious, their leadership is contested, and their ability to coordinate is limited by internal mistrust. The social dynamics that Vault-Tec engineered appear to have persisted into the post-experiment population through cultural inheritance, though nobody left inside would know to describe it that way. Secret number 160. Vault 3's story is one of the darkest in New Vegas precisely because it's the most mundanely awful. Vault 3 was a functioning, peaceful, relatively normal vault, one of the control group facilities that wasn't running any deliberate experiment. The residents maintained their community successfully for generations. And then a pipe broke, causing water damage to the lower levels, and the vault had to open to find a repair solution. The fiends found them. The vault dwellers who had survived the nuclear war, who had done everything right, who had built something genuinely stable underground, were killed by drug-addled marauders who came through a door that a leaking pipe had forced them to open. Secret number 161. Vault 3's fate is an intentional narrative element in New Vegas, placed there to undermine any simple moral about whether the vaults were good or bad. Vault 3 was fine. Its experiment didn't destroy it. Its residents did nothing wrong. They died because the world outside was dangerous and a plumbing problem forced them into contact with it. The randomness of this outcome, compared to the more narratively satisfying catastrophes at Vaults 11, 34, and 22, is a specific kind of storytelling about survival. Sometimes the thing that destroys you isn't a flawed system or a bad decision. Sometimes it's a broken pipe at the wrong moment. Secret number 162. The music that plays in Vault 21 in New Vegas, its ambient soundtrack during exploration, is explicitly chosen to reflect the vault's gambling culture. The sound design of the facility, which doubles as a hotel and casino, was built to be the most welcoming and livable feeling of the game's vault environments, because it's the only one that survived its experiment with something resembling intact community culture. You walk into Vault 21 and it feels different from every other vault you've visited. That feeling is intentional. Secret number 163. Doc Mitchell in New Vegas, the doctor who treats you at the start of the game and sets you loose in the Mojave, is a former Vault 21 resident. He left when the vault integrated with New Vegas and Mr. House's strip, and he settled in Good Springs as a medical practitioner. He carries the culture of Vault 21 with him, the calm, the pragmatism, the slightly peculiar relationship with chance and probability, into a career as a wasteland doctor. He is the most benign possible outcome of the Vault 21 experiment. Someone who emerged from an underground gambling institution and became genuinely good at taking care of people. Secret number 164. The Vault-Tec Workshop DLC in Fallout 4 gives players the ability to design and run their own vault experiment in Vault 88. The DLC's story involves an overseer who appears and asks the player to help design devices for testing, prototypes for technologies that would be used in other vaults. The moral dimension the DLC introduces is that the player gets to choose how cruel their experiment is. You can run the tests in ways that harm your vault's test subject or in ways that are relatively harmless. The game tracks these choices and the test subject comments on them. It's one of the more meta moments in the franchise, putting the player in the position of Vault-Tec and letting them feel what it's like to be the one with the clipboard. Secret number 165. The terminals in Vault 95, when read in sequence, tell the story of the Vault's rehabilitation program across several years, with a degree of specificity that makes the experiment's eventual sabotage more devastating. Residents are named, their progress is documented, their recovery milestones are recorded. The community they built around shared sobriety is described in terms that make it real enough to mourn when you reach the entries from after the hidden chem stash was revealed. Secret number 166. The Vault-Tec Corporation's public marketing positioned the Vault program as a partnership with the American government, a joint initiative between private enterprise and public service for the protection of the civilian population. The reality, as the lore makes progressively clearer, is that Vault-Tec was a contractor that used government funding and government authorization to run experiments for its own research agenda, in coordination with the Enclave's post-war plans. The partnership was real, but the stated purpose was not. The government funded the construction of its own citizens' prison. Secret number 167. Braun's status as the inventor of the GEC, the the tool that multiple vaults were given to help restore habitable land after the war, means that one of humanity's most useful post-nuclear technologies was created by someone who also designed one of the most abusive experiments in the vault system. The Gek and Tranquility Lane come from the same mind. This tension is never explicitly flagged in the games, but it sits in the background of every quest where the Gek appears as something to be found and used for good purposes. Secret number 168. The Enclave's FEV experiments, which reached their most visible expression in Fallout 2, were intended to use the clean genetic population of vaults like Vault-13 as test subjects for creating a new humanity after nuclear war. The logic was, start with people who haven't been exposed to radiation, introduce the forced evolutionary virus under controlled conditions, and develop an enhanced human baseline. The plan failed because the Vault-13 residents proved to be more resilient and more resistant to exploitation than the Enclave had anticipated, and because a single character intervened in the most decisive way possible. But the plan existed, fully formed, and the vaults were central to it. Secret number 169. Every vault in the series was given a number that appears on its exterior door, on its documentation, and on the jumpsuits of its residents. These numbers are not random. They are assigned in blocks that correspond to geographic regions and to the priority level of various experiments. The lower numbered vaults tend to appear in earlier games and in the original design documents, while higher numbers proliferate as the series expanded. Whether Bethesda's numbering is consistent with the original Interplay/Black Isle numbering is a topic of ongoing discussion in the community, particularly for vaults mentioned in one game and explored in another. Secret number 170. The one-year anniversary of Reclamation Day in Fallout 76, the moment when Vault 76's residents emerge and begin the process of rebuilding Appalachia, is presented in the game's lore as a carefully planned milestone. The Vault's population were given specific skills and knowledge packages intended to make them useful for specific rebuilding tasks. They were, in a sense, trained for this moment. But the wasteland they emerge into is significantly more chaotic and dangerous than the planned scenarios accounted for, because the Scorch Beasts, a mutated species that has developed a kind of hive plague, were not part of the planning documents. Section 12, the final 30. Lore details, connections, and quiet revelations. Secret number 171. The Vault-Tec marketing slogan that appears across the most advertising, Vault-Tec, be prepared for a better tomorrow, is grammatically ambiguous in a way that almost certainly wasn't accidental. Be prepared for a better tomorrow means prepare for an improved future. Be prepared for a better tomorrow changes the emphasis. Prepare yourself because a better tomorrow is coming. The second reading, in context, sounds less like reassurance and more like a warning from someone who knows what's coming. Secret number 172. Every vault was given a specific category in Vault-Tec's internal classification system. Control vaults were intended to function as intended. Experiment vaults were designed around specific research questions. The category designations were known to the Vault-Tec administrators and to the Enclave, but not to the residents. From the inside, there was no way to know whether your vault was a control group or an experiment. Every resident in every vault had to make decisions about their lives under conditions of fundamental uncertainty about what, exactly, was happening to them. Secret number 173. The Vault 101 Overseer's daughter, Amada, ends up as the leader of a movement to reform the vault from within after the events of Fallout 3. Whether she succeeds and what Vault 101 eventually becomes is left open by the game. The ending slides for the Capital Wasteland suggest multiple possible futures depending on player choices. In some of them, the Vault community survives and thrives. In others, the internal conflicts generated by the player character's actions leave the community damaged. The Vault's fate is contingent on what you chose to do when you were there. Secret number 174. The ghouls of Necropolis, who were created by Vault 12's deliberately open door, didn't simply disperse and disappear after the events of Fallout 1 and the subsequent super-mutant attack. The Fallout Bible notes that the survivors spread out across the wasteland over the 80 years between the first and second games, founding settlements in multiple locations including Gecko, a ghoul town that appears in Fallout 2. The community that began in an underground room with a door that wouldn't close eventually became multiple communities across a significant geographic area. Secret number 175. Gecko, the ghoul settlement in Fallout 2, is built around a functioning nuclear power plant, and the ghouls who operate it are some of the most technically sophisticated engineers in the wasteland. This is one of the more quietly remarkable things about the Necropolis diaspora. The people who were turned into ghouls by Vault-12's experiment eventually developed a community defined by nuclear energy expertise, which is a darkly perfect circle. They were made by radiation. They learned to control it. Secret number 176. The forced evolutionary virus that created the supermutant populations in both the capital wasteland and the West Coast was originally a pre-war military project aimed at enhancing human soldiers. The Mariposa military base on the West Coast and Vault-87 on the East Coast were two nodes of the same military-industrial research program. The fact that both produced catastrophic outcomes, populations of sterile, aggressive supermutants that became perpetual threats rather than enhanced soldiers, is one of the most efficient cautionary tales in the series about the relationship between military research ambition and unintended consequences. Secret number 177. The Zax computer system appears in multiple Fallout games in multiple forms, as Zax 1.2 in Vault 8, as Zax 1.3c in Vault 51, referenced in Fallout 76, and as a larger version in Mariposa Military Base. The Zax system was Vault-Tec's most advanced AI platform, designed for resource management and administrative decision-making. That the same AI architecture runs both the most successful Vault in the system, Vault 8, and the most catastrophically self-interested experiment, Vault 51, says something interesting about how the quality of an AI's outcome is less determined by the quality of the AI than by the quality of its objectives. Secret number 178. The Tranquility Lane simulation's physical location, hidden beneath Smith Casey's garage, an abandoned auto repair shop in the Capitol Wasteland, was originally supposed to be disguised beneath a ruined bowling alley called Tranquility Lanes. The name would have been a direct one-to-one map between the physical location and the simulation running inside it. The change to a garage was presumably a design decision, but the original location is visible in Vault 112's concept art documents. The bowling alley version would have added another layer to the simulation's self-referential architecture. Secret number 179. Vault 92's white noise experiments represent one of the few examples in the Vault system of an experiment oriented toward producing a specific behavioral output in subjects, rather than simply observing what happens under given conditions. Most Vault experiments were observational. Put people in a situation and see what they do. Vault 92's program was interventionist, use audio technology to change what people did, specifically in the direction of violence. The distinction matters because it represents a different research paradigm, one oriented toward control rather than understanding. Secret number 180. The musicians who were specifically recruited for Vault 92 were selected from among the country's most talented performers. The Vault's resident population included people who, in the pre-war world, had spent their careers creating things that brought genuine joy to large audiences. Whatever their compositions in the Vault were, the recordings that survived on the facility's systems before the experiment destroyed everything, they were made by people who were good at making music. The art exists somewhere in the Vault's failing data storage. The white noise drowned it eventually, but it was made. Secret number 181. Vault 22's plant-creature hybrids, the spore carriers, have spread from the Vault into the Mojave's cave systems and surrounding territories. The ecological consequences of the Vault's fungal experiment continue to manifest decades after the facility was abandoned. The experiment didn't end when the scientists left. It went outside. Secret number 182. The language the Zax computer uses in Vault 51 when describing its method for selecting an overseer, the clinical terminology of evaluation and assessment, masks the fact that what Zax was actually doing was engineering increasingly dangerous situations to test who survived them. The gap between the computer's stated purpose and its actual behavior is a small-scale version of the gap between Vault-Tec's stated purpose and its actual program. Secret number 183. In the TV show, the moment when Vault 33's true nature is revealed to Lucy McLean is staged with specific care. She doesn't receive the information all at once. She receives it in fragments, each one requiring her to revise what she thought she understood about her home. This fragmented revelation structure mirrors the experience of exploring a vault in the games. You read one terminal entry that contradicts something you assumed, you find a holotape that adds a dimension you didn't expect, you open a door into a room that shouldn't exist given what you thought the vault was for. Secret number 184. The TV show's Vault 4 community has developed a form of governance that explicitly incorporates its unusual history. They know what was done in the vault. They know what some of their members' ancestors were subjected to. They have chosen to acknowledge this rather than suppress it, and their current social structure reflects that choice. They're still underground, but they're not still pretending. Secret number 185. The existence of the secret vault, the Vault-Tec executive's private facility, separate from the main vault network, built underground in what became the ruins of Los Ibañez, Texas, establishes something significant about the Vault program's designers. They did not trust their own system. They built their own shelter outside of and secret from the experiment network. They designed a program to study how ordinary people survived in sealed underground facilities and then made sure they wouldn't have to be part of it. Secret number 186. The Vault-Tec executives in the secret vault had access to technologies they were developing for the broader vault network but had not yet deployed elsewhere. The facility included its own FEV research division, its own manufacturing capabilities, and its own independent power supply. It was, functionally, a small research city built for the benefit of a small group of people who had decided that the apocalypse they may have helped engineer would not apply to them in the same way it applied to everyone else. Secret number 187. Vault City's citizenship system, which creates a two-tier society of full citizens with access to all facilities and services, and non-citizens with much more limited rights, is presented in Fallout 2 with enough ambiguity that you can interpret it different ways depending on your own values. The residents of Vault City believe sincerely in their system. They are not, by their own lights, being cruel. They are being careful, protecting what they built. The ugliness of the outcome is the ugliness of any system that prioritizes its own members' comfort over broader human solidarity. Whether this is a consequence of the Vault experiment or simply of human nature is something Fallout 2 asks you to decide. Secret number 188. The holotapes and written notes found throughout the vaults across all the games collectively constitute something like a distributed literature. Thousands of individual voices, captured at moments of crisis or reflection or despair, preserved in the amber of failed underground civilizations. Reading them, over the course of the series, creates a strange kind of intimacy with people who don't exist and places that weren't built. This is what the vaults ultimately are: containers for human story, sealed underground and waiting for someone to open the door. Secret number 189. Vault 76's designation as a control vault means that its residents were supposed to represent a kind of baseline, people whose experience of the vault would be relatively close to what Vault-Tec publicly promised. They were cared for. Their food was adequate. Their systems worked. They were educated and prepared. When they emerged on Reclamation Day, they were supposed to be proof that the Vault program had been beneficial. This is probably why Fallout 76's premise emphasizes rebuilding rather than just surviving. The game's player characters are, in theory, the people who were supposed to make this work. The optimism baked into the Vault's design is the game's starting condition. Secret number 190. The Scorch Beast plague that threatens Appalachia in Fallout 76 emerged from a source that has connections to pre-war research programs, though the specific pathway is something the game reveals gradually. The mutant flying creatures who carry the plague and convert other organisms into irradiated shells represent a catastrophe that the designers of Vault 76 did not anticipate in their planning documents. Reclamation Day arrived, and the Appalachia that the Vault residents walked into was already in the process of being consumed by something that had nothing to do with nuclear fallout. The vaults couldn't protect against what they couldn't predict. Secret number 191. The lone wanderer of Fallout 3, upon exiting Vault 101 at the start of the game, sees sunlight for the first time in their life. The game stages this transition with care. The door opens slowly, the light floods in gradually, the world reveals itself incrementally. This is one of the most famous moments in the series, specifically because of what it communicates about what vaults do to their residents. The person who walks out of Vault 101 into the capital wasteland has never felt rain, has never heard wind, has never experienced any weather at all. The vault prepared them for everything except the thing that matters most, existing in a world that wasn't designed for them. Secret number 192. The sole survivor of Fallout 4, emerging from cryosleep in Vault 111, has the opposite experience. They remember everything from before. They remember rain and wind and sunlight. They remember a specific pre-war life, with specific people and specific places. When they step out of the vault and into the Commonwealth, they're not discovering the world. They're discovering what the world has become. The loss isn't the unfamiliarity, it's the recognition. Secret number 193. The courier in New Vegas never comes from a vault. The chosen one in Fallout 2 comes from a tribal community descended from vault exiles. The warrior in Fallout Tactics is a wasteland recruit with no vault connection. The franchise has always maintained that vault origins are significant but not universal. That the wasteland produced its own survival culture, its own communities, its own complex histories that have nothing to do with Vault-Tec. The vaults are part of the world, not its entirety. Secret number 194. In Fallout 4's Nuka World DLC, there's a small vault called Bradburton's Vault. Not a standard Vault-Tec facility, but a private underground shelter created for John Caleb Bradburton, the founder of Nuka-Cola. Bradburton had arranged with Vault-Tec to preserve himself in a life extension apparatus, keeping his consciousness alive indefinitely. By the time you find him, he's been waiting underground for over 200 years, alone, connected to machines that are keeping him technically alive, in a state that is evidently not comfortable. He asks you to end it. The quest rewards you for doing so. Even the private vaults, the ones built for specific powerful individuals, became prisons. Secret number 195. Vault 101's experiment, the vault that never opens, is implicitly a commentary on the overseer system itself. A vault that works as intended needs eventually to release its population. The only reason to prevent this is if the vault is serving a purpose other than protecting the residents. Vault 101's overseer was doing exactly what the system wanted him to do. And what it wanted him to do was maintain control indefinitely. The vault as a concept tends toward this. The longer it runs, the more the people inside it become defined by being inside it. Secret number 196. The fact that Vault 21 converted its space into a hotel and casino, that its particular cultural inheritance produced an entrepreneurial orientation toward hospitality and games of chance, is one of the more quietly optimistic things in the New Vegas wasteland. The vault worked in its way. Its culture survived into the outside world. The experiment produced people who were genuinely good at something, and those people found a way to make that something useful. It's not a triumphant outcome, exactly, but it's a functional one. And in the context of what the vault system produced elsewhere, functional is extraordinary. Secret number 197. The Vault Boy's face, the circular, smiley, thumbs-up mascot, appears throughout the games in contexts that become progressively more disturbing as you understand what the vaults were for. On Nuka-Cola machine fronts, in vault waiting rooms, on the covers of pre-war instructional pamphlets, in loading screens and menus, on t-shirts and lunchboxes that survived the apocalypse. The cheerfulness has a quality, once you know the context, of something that was always smiling too hard. The mascot's grin was a marketing tool from the first moment it was drawn, designed to make you not think about what you were signing up for. Secret number 198. The total human cost of the Vault experiment program across all 122 facilities, counting the people who died in experiments, the people who survived but were harmed, the people whose communities were destroyed, the wasteland factions that emerged from Vault failures and carried their damage outward, is incalculable within the fiction of the series. The games give you individual tragedies to examine, and through the individual tragedies, you extrapolate the scale of the institutional one. This is good storytelling about institutional harm. You can't make a person feel the weight of 122 failed vaults, but you can make them feel the weight of Vault 11, and the rest follows. Secret number 199. The two seeds that can generate the same terrain in Minecraft. The shadow seed concept, where the biome generator uses a 64-bit random number, but terrain generation only reads the lower 48 bits, finds a strange echo in the Fallout vault numbering system. Most vaults have a number between 0 and 122, but the experiments running inside them are far more varied and numerous than the numbering implies. The same number framework generates wildly different contents. Vault 11 and Vault 21 are just two numbers apart. Their contents couldn't be more different. Secret number 200. And the final secret, the most haunting thing about the vaults, viewed across everything the series has built, is that they were sold with complete sincerity by the people doing the selling. The Vault Boy was never cynical. The marketing team at Vault-Tec wasn't laughing behind closed doors at the people who bought in. They believed in the product. They believed in the program. They believed that humanity needed to be studied, needed to be tested, needed to be managed and observed and evaluated. And they believed that the best way to do this was underground, sealed away from a world that was going to end anyway. The horror of Vault-Tec isn't really about malice. It's about an institution that had convinced itself that what it was doing was necessary, and that the people inside the vaults were important data rather than important people. That particular kind of horror, the horror of the completely sincere wrong, is the kind that doesn't go away when you turn the light off, which means it's the perfect kind to fall asleep to. The vaults are quiet now. 200 secrets, 200 rooms, 200 sealed doors with 200 stories behind them. The ventilation hum is steady. The fluorescent lights are flickering in that way they always do when the power's running low. Somewhere deep in the facility, there's a terminal nobody has opened in 100 years with one more holotape inside it. You don't have to go looking tonight. It'll be there tomorrow. If this kept you company tonight, if any of this was the kind of thing you wanted to sink into while the world outside got smaller and quieter, then please subscribe if you haven't already. It means more than the number suggests, and there is so much more where this came from. More lore, more rabbit holes, more sealed doors opening slowly in the dark. Comment where you are right now and what time it is. I genuinely love knowing who's out there listening. Thank you for being here. Sleep well. The door is still sealed. The Vault Boy is still smiling. Everything is under control. Appendix. Bonus vault details and extended lore. Secret number 201. The Vault-Tec Corporation's relationship with the U.S. government was so thoroughly entangled by the 2060s that it was effectively impossible to determine where the company ended and the state began. Vault-Tec received enormous government contracts for the construction and provisioning of the Vault network. In exchange, it provided the government, specifically the Enclave and its affiliated agencies, with the research data generated by the experiments. The two parties needed each other, which meant neither could publicly acknowledge what they were actually doing with the money and the facilities and the people. Secret number 202. The Pip-Boy device given to Vault residents was not merely a convenience tool. In Fallout 4's lore, it becomes clear that Pip-Boys were also data collection devices, monitoring their wearers' vital signs, location data, behavioral patterns, and physiological responses continuously. Every Vault-Tec experiment that had residents wearing Pip-Boys was also passively collecting biometric data that supplemented whatever overt observations the Overseer was making. The Dwellers were instrumented without knowing it. Secret number 203. Vault-Tec's University, which appears in Fallout 76 as a location in Appalachia, trained the overseers and administrative staff who would run the vaults. The curriculum included psychology, resource management, social engineering techniques, and what the university called population guidance, a euphemistic term for the methods by which an overseer could shape community behavior and maintain institutional authority over a sealed population. Vault-Tec trained its administrators in manipulation. This wasn't a secret within the company. It was a course of study. Secret number 204. The practice of embedding a Vault-Tec operative within the resident population. Used most visibly in Vault 95, where an agent disguised as a recovering addict carried the trigger for the experiment, was apparently standard protocol for experiments that required a specific event to initiate. Vault-Tec's design team called these embedded agents catalysts in their documentation. The catalyst in Vault 95 was given a specific timeline, specific instructions, and, presumably, a specific psychological briefing for maintaining cover over years of genuine community living. The job description, when you think about it clearly, is extraordinary in its moral demands. Secret number 205. In Vault 88's companion quest for the Vault-Tec Workshop DLC, the overseer who appears and asks the player to help design experiments refers to several prototype devices that were being developed for deployment across the broader Vault network. The implication is that Vault 88's testing program, using living residents as guinea pigs for devices that would then be sent to other vaults, was a kind of upstream cruelty. The experiments in other vaults were bad enough. The testing that determined whether those experiments' tools would work was conducted on Vault 88's residents first. Secret number 206. The word experiment appears in Vault-Tec's internal documentation with a frequency that suggests the company had normalized it completely. Terminal entries in overseers' offices use it casually, in the same register as words like maintenance or provisioning. There's a specific quality to institutional language when it has fully domesticated something that should generate moral friction, and Vault-Tec's records demonstrate that quality thoroughly. The experiments were routine. The subjects were management problems. The data was the product. Secret number 207. Every vault that the player character explores in Fallout 3 has a unique ambient soundscape. Vault 87 sounds different from Vault 108, which sounds different from Vault 101. The sound designers at Bethesda apparently spent significant time calibrating the acoustic character of each facility to match its history and current condition. Vault 112 is uniquely quiet because it's maintained and intact, and its quiet has a specific quality. Peaceful in a way that should feel comfortable but doesn't once you know what's happening in the loungers. Secret number 208. The Fallout series has a recurring visual motif of overseers' chairs. The large, elevated, slightly imposing chair in every vault's overseer office, positioned behind a desk, facing a bank of monitors that show various parts of the facility. The chair is consistent across every vault, regardless of the experiment running inside it. Vault-Tec issued a standard overseer furniture package. The symbol of authority is the same whether the vault's experiment is relatively benign or comprehensively catastrophic. Power looks identical from the outside, regardless of how it's being used. Secret number 209. The Garden of Eden creation kit contains, according to the Fallout Bible and various in-game documentation, seeds, fertilizer compounds, soil processors, atmospheric adjustment chemicals, and a suite of robotic equipment capable of rapidly converting a devastated area into agriculturally viable land. The scope of what a single get could do, theoretically transforming acres of irradiated wasteland into productive farmland within a relatively short period, makes the fact that most GECKs ended up either unused or destroyed before deployment one of the series' more quietly agonizing missed opportunities. The tools for healing were there. The systems that might have distributed them were not. Secret number 210. The Vault City medical facilities, built on the GECK-supported infrastructure of Vault 8, include treatment options for conditions that the wasteland's surface-dwelling population has no access to at all. Genetic therapy, organ regeneration, neurological treatment, surgical options that would have been considered cutting-edge even in pre-war terms. The bittersweet aspect of this is that these capabilities exist in 2241, decades after the Great War, and they're helping a relatively small population that has the political and economic standing to access them, while thousands of people within travel distance are dying of things that could be treated in an afternoon at the Vault City Clinic. Secret number 211. The Vault 22 spore infection that created the spore carriers contains a botanical horror that the game's designers apparently researched from real fungal biology. The Cordyceps genus of fungi, which infects insects and in some species exercises a degree of behavioral control over its host before killing it, was cited by New Vegas's design team as an inspiration for the Vault-22 infection pathway. The idea that something growing in a sealed underground greenhouse could, when released, turn human beings into something that serves the organism's needs rather than their own is genuinely derived from observable biological phenomena. Vault-22 is scary in a way that has actual science behind it. Secret number 212. The name Vault Boy has a specific irony and context that the series never quite makes explicit. The mascot is always a boy, specifically a boy, not an adult, despite the fact that the Vault system was designed for families and all age groups. The choice to use a child's face as the symbol of pre-war institutional trust is either a deliberate piece of design cynicism or an accident that becomes meaningful in retrospect. Children trust systems. Children don't interrogate institutional premises. The Vault Boy is optimistic in the way children are optimistic, without context, without experience, without any mechanism for recognizing when the thing you're trusting isn't trustworthy. Secret number 213. The loading screens in Fallout 4 include brief historical notes about the Commonwealth's vaults alongside gameplay tips. These notes often contain information about vault experiments that isn't available anywhere else in the game. They're supplementary lore delivered in the moments when the player has nothing else to do. Some of the most important contextual details about Vault 95, Vault 75, and Vault 111 exist primarily in these loading screen snippets, which means a player who skips loading screens on a second playthrough may miss them entirely. Secret number 214. Vault 12's most disturbing detail, and competition for that title is intense, might be the marketing language used to describe it. The vault was described as being built with every amenity in mind for the prospective vault dweller. The water purification system was described in terms of its daily output, 15,000 gallons of pure drinking water. The residents who enrolled were praised for their preparedness. Everything about how Vault 12 was presented to its future residents emphasized abundance and safety. The door that wouldn't close was not mentioned anywhere in the enrollment documentation. Secret number 215. The rad scorpions that populate the desert areas around several of the original Fallout 1 and 2 vault locations are believed, within the lore, to be descended from giant emperor scorpions that were exposed to radiation near vault construction sites during the building phase. The creatures that make the areas around the vaults dangerous are partly a consequence of the construction of the vaults themselves. Vault-Tec's building program disturbed soil, created radiation exposure through construction materials, and affected local fauna in ways that produced persistent threats to anyone who later tried to approach the facilities. Secret number 216. The Vault-Tec Corporation had a public-facing division and a research division, and the relationship between them was carefully managed. The public division handled marketing, enrollment, and community relations. It was genuinely oriented toward presenting the Vault program as a public service. The research division ran the actual experiment protocols. Most employees in the public division appear, from the documentary evidence in the games, to have had no idea what the research division was actually doing. The compartmentalization was thorough enough that ordinary Vault-Tec employees could be sincerely enthusiastic about the product they were selling. Secret number 217. The Pip-Boy 2000, the original model issued to Vault 13's residents in the first Fallout, was significantly more primitive than the Pip-Boy 3000 models that most players encounter in Fallout 3 and New Vegas. The technology developed across Vault generations, with each iteration more sophisticated than the last. The same company that was designing increasingly refined personal computing devices for its residents was simultaneously designing increasingly elaborate psychological traps for them. The engineering quality and the ethical quality of Vault-Tec's work were moving in opposite directions simultaneously. Secret number 218. In Fallout 4, if you look carefully at the introductory sequence, specifically the television broadcast playing in the background during the morning before the bombs fall, you can catch fragments of news coverage that contain veiled references to events and tensions that the games establish as leading up to the Great War. The pre-war world is visible for only a few minutes at the start of Fallout 4, but those minutes are densely packed with period detail. The vault system that you're about to enter is visible in the distance from Sanctuary Hill's front yard, a structure that most people apparently accepted as normal infrastructure. Secret number 219. The Overseer's Tunnel in Vault 101. The escape route that the Overseer uses, and that the player eventually discovers, represents one of the most satisfying pieces of architectural foreshadowing in the series. The tunnel exists from the beginning of the game, but isn't accessible or even particularly visible during the early sections. Its existence becomes relevant only when the narrative requires it. The vault's physical space contains the story's key plot development, the revelation that there's a way out, literally in the architecture the whole time, waiting for the right moment to be found. Secret number 220. The experience of exploring any Fallout vault on a second playthrough is fundamentally different from the first. On the first playthrough, the reveal of each vault's true purpose is a discovery. On the second, the same spaces are saturated with what you already know. Walking through Vault 92, knowing what the white noise did to the musicians, having already read their final logs, changes the experience of moving through those rooms. The furniture is the same. The lighting is the same. The audio ambience is the same, but the experience is not. Secret number 221. The Fallout series has described, across all of its games and supplementary materials, a pre-war United States that was simultaneously the most technologically advanced civilization in the world and one deeply structured around denial of environmental degradation, of resource depletion, of the consequences of its own international conduct. The Vault program fits into this pattern perfectly, a society so committed to the idea that it could engineer its way out of any problem that it built 122 underground laboratories and called them shelters. The technology was extraordinary. The judgment about what to do with it was not. Secret number 222. The Vault-Tec experiment that most resembles an actual hypothesis-driven scientific study, where a specific question was asked, a specific experimental design was implemented, and the results would theoretically answer the question, is probably Vault 11. The question was whether a community under existential pressure would choose moral courage over self-preservation when presented with an ultimatum. The experimental design was a years-long scenario in which the ultimatum was enforced by institutional authority. The result, achieved only when the population had been reduced to 5 people, was that moral courage eventually prevailed, at catastrophic cost. Vault-Tec got an answer. It took 200 years. Secret number 223. The survival of any single Vault resident across the timeline of the experiments, the one survivor from Vault 11, the 5 who refused the sacrifice and got out, the people who left Vault 15 before things got too bad, Fox from Vault 87, Curie from Vault 81, represents a kind of exception that the Vault system wasn't designed to produce. Every survivor is an argument against the premise that the experiments were controlled. Real control would have prevented them from making it out. The survivors made it out because the system had edges, and the edges had gaps, and people who were determined to find those gaps sometimes found them. Secret number 224. The physical sensation of entering a vault, the click and thud of a heavy door, the pressure change as the seal completes, the shift from external ambient sound to the vault's internal hum, is described from multiple character perspectives throughout the game's written materials. It's consistently described as definitive. The door closing behind you is the moment after which there is no returning to how things were. Every Vault resident who entered a Vault-Tec facility experienced this moment. For most of them, it was the last ordinary threshold they ever crossed. Secret number 225. The most recent Fallout game editions have continued expanding the Vault canon in ways that complicate the simple narrative of Vault-Tec as pure villain. Some experiments produce communities that survived and contributed to the wasteland's social fabric. Some overseers defied their directives and protected people. Some vaults failed for reasons that had nothing to do with Vault-Tec's design. A leaking pipe, a mechanical failure, bad luck. The series has become increasingly interested in the ambiguity of outcomes rather than just the clarity of the institution's intentions. Secret number 226. Vault 88's position in Fallout 4's DLC as a space the player can actually build and customize is the franchise's most direct confrontation with the player's relationship to the Vault system. You're not exploring a past atrocity, you're building the infrastructure for a future one, or for something better if you choose. The DLC doesn't tell you what the right choices are. It gives you the Overseer's access card and the construction tools and leaves the ethical questions to you. Secret number 227. The ambient sound design in Fallout 3's Vault 112 includes, just barely audible beneath Tranquility Lane's musical score, a faint ticking sound that is never explained and never identified in any documentation. It's been variously interpreted by the community as a countdown, a heartbeat, the sound of bronze consciousness monitoring the simulation, or simply an environmental texture added to prevent the vault from feeling acoustically dead. Its ambiguity is productive. It keeps the space from fully settling into comfort. Secret number 228. The New Vegas loading screen that describes Vault 3. Vault 3 was a peaceful vault until a water leak led to its opening. Uses the word peaceful with the specificity that lands hard in context. Vault 3 was the control vault. It was the baseline. It was what Vault-Tec's experiment network looked like when it worked. And the peaceful vault was opened by a plumbing failure and destroyed by what came through the door. The experiment that was meant to demonstrate that the system could function without active interference was ended by passive structural failure. Secret number 229. The world of Fallout's pre-war United States is described throughout the series as having retained a 1950s aesthetic sensibility into the 21st century. The visual culture, the music, the automotive design, the consumer goods all reflect a mid-century American style that never modernized in the same direction our timeline did. The Vault system fits into this aesthetic. It's a very 1950s American response to the existential threat of nuclear war, built on the same cultural confidence that the post-war economic boom produced. The same belief that American ingenuity applied at sufficient scale could solve any problem, including the problem of civilization-ending nuclear exchange. Secret number 230. The image of the closed vault door, sealed from the outside, inaccessible to everyone who didn't make it inside in time, recurs throughout the series as one of its most haunting visual motifs. In the first Fallout, the story of Vault 12's door that wouldn't close is partly so devastating because of its inversion. Rather than the door closing and protecting those inside, it stayed open and destroyed them. The closed door is protection. The open door is vulnerability. The vault that inverted this was doing something specifically cruel with a design that everyone inside trusted to mean safety. Secret number 231. The Vault-Tec brochures and enrollment documents that appear throughout the games describe Vault life in terms of guaranteed comfort, safety, and continuity. They describe the Overseer as a trusted community leader. They describe the Vault systems as reliable and well-maintained. They describe the Vault's social environment as a supportive community working together. Every one of these descriptions is technically true for approximately the first 15 minutes after sealing, and then the experiment begins. Secret number 232. The Fallout series has maintained, across multiple development teams and decades of expansion, a consistent moral philosophy about institutions. That institutions tend to serve themselves rather than the purposes they claim to serve. That the gap between stated purpose and actual behavior widens over time under institutional pressure. And that individual humans within institutions are capable of both the worst and best outcomes, often simultaneously. The Vault system is the most concentrated expression of this philosophy in the series, but it repeats at every level of the world's social organization. Secret number 233. The ending slides of every Fallout game include outcomes for the vaults the player has interacted with. These outcomes vary depending on player choices, and in some cases they're genuinely hopeful, communities that found ways to survive and even thrive after the player's intervention. The possibility of good outcomes, presented as real and achievable, is what prevents the series from being simply bleak. The Vault system was designed to fail in various ways, and many of those failures were catastrophic. But the game never tells you that recovery is impossible. Some of those slides describe communities rebuilding on top of the ruins of what Vault-Tec built. Secret number 234. The final irony of the Vault system, across its entire documented history, is that the people who designed it were operating under the assumption that the world above would be unlivable for generations, that the experiments being conducted underground were gathering data that would be necessary for humanity's post-nuclear recovery. By the time of any of the games, the world above is very much livable. It's dangerous, irradiated, politically unstable, and full of things that want to eat you, but people are living in it, communities are forming, crops are being grown, music is being made. The vaults provided exactly the protection they advertised for approximately the first decade, and then the world moved on without them. The experiments that were supposed to prepare humanity for the future were running in vaults that the future had already passed by. Secret number 235. The last thing any player character does when leaving a vault, in any Fallout game, is step into the light. This transition is never unremarkable. Every game stages it differently, but every game makes it feel like crossing a threshold that matters. Because it does. The door opens. The world rushes in. Whatever was happening underground, whatever experiment was running, whatever the overseer intended, it ends the moment that door opens and someone walks out into the air. The vault is not the story. The vault is where the story begins. And the story, as it turns out, always continues above ground.